Hello. My name is Eliza Kane. They said it was an accident, that I panicked during the flood, that maybe I misunderstood what happened. But I remember the sound of the lock clicking. I remember the water rising. I remember screaming her name through the vent while she stood upstairs, silent. My sister didn't just leave me behind. She sealed the door shut and made sure no one would believe me. They called me unstable, dramatic, too sensitive to trust with the truth. But if I was so fragile, why did she work so hard to silence me? And what else had she already erased before they finally heard me scream? The power had gone out sometime after midnight. I couldn't tell exactly when. It wasn't like I'd been sleeping peacefully. My brain had been half awake for hours, turning over useless thoughts and trying to tune out the heavy hum of the lavender diffuser my sister insisted I run every night. "It'll help you relax," she'd said, slipping the plug into the outlet like she was doing me a favor. At first, I thought the dripping I heard was coming from the kitchen sink. Then I realized it was too slow, too deliberate, like water finding its way through wood. The room felt heavy, a dampness clinging to the sheets. I swung my legs off the bed and stepped onto the floor. It was cold, wetter than it should have been. I reached for my phone. No bars. Dead screen. Of course. I shuffled to the hallway and blinked. The baseboards were bleeding water, just a thin stream, but growing. The carpet squished underfoot, and the only light in the house came from occasional flashes of lightning slicing across the living room. I could hear the river again. Or maybe it was the bayou. Either way, it was louder than it had ever been. I grabbed the flashlight from the hall drawer, the one Sable kept stocked with batteries like she was always preparing for a disaster. She'd told me once, if something ever happens, don't wait, go straight to the basement. The sump pump will keep us safe. The words echoed in my ears as I made my way to the basement door. I flipped the latch, opened it slowly. A heavy mustiness hit me. That smell you can't quite name. Mold, old dirt, wet concrete. The air felt like it had weight. I descended the stairs slowly, one step at a time. My light cut through the darkness in sharp angles. The basement looked normal, no panic yet, just wet walls. The pump was quiet. Then it happened. A metallic click, sharp, decisive, from behind me. I turned, instinctively racing back up 2 steps, but the door had slammed shut. My hand reached the knob. I twisted. Nothing. I pushed. Still nothing. I twisted again, harder. It rattled, but didn't budge. No. My heart dropped into my stomach. I banged the door. "Sable?" No answer. "Sable!" Still nothing. I pounded harder, fist to wood, then shoulder to door. "Let me out!" Water dripped down from the staircase above, cold and relentless. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing but storm. And that's when I saw it. The flashlight beam swept across the inside of the door. A glint. A flash. The edge of a padlock. New, clean, drilled into the frame. I blinked hard. The same door that had always opened freely. Now sealed from the outside. Who the hell had locked it? No. Who else would have locked it? It was new. I knew the basement like the back of my hand. That wasn't there yesterday. It couldn't have been. A different kind of fear spread through my chest. Not the fear of water, not yet, but the fear of knowing something had changed, and I wasn't meant to know it. I started to shake, not because of the cold, though there was plenty of that, but because everything in my body wanted to scream, run, escape, but there was no place to go. I pulled my phone again, still dead, no charger, no backup. That wasn't allowed in the house anymore, not for me at least. The water on the floor had risen. It was now at my shins. The sump pump remained silent. I checked the switch. Dead. I screamed again. "Somebody! Please! I'm locked in!" I reached the only window in the basement, too small to crawl through, just a slit near the ceiling, facing the backyard. The rain pelted it like bullets. My flashlight flickered once, then held steady. That's when I knew. I couldn't rely on anything but myself. I dragged over a box, then another, stacking them until I could reach the vent above the window. I stood, knees wobbling. I pressed my mouth to the metal slits. "Help! I'm in here! Please!" Silence. Then, voices. Garbled. Outside. A shout. Movement. I banged the metal with the flashlight. Down here! I'm down here! A beam of light cut across the backyard, and then, footsteps. My body tensed. Was it her? Sable? I whispered. No reply, just a low voice, male. You hear that? My heart slammed against my ribs. I leaned closer to the vent. I'm locked in the basement, I screamed. Help! The door's sealed from the outside. Ma'am? A voice called. Can you repeat that? I didn't hesitate. My sister locked me in the basement. She wants me dead. There was a pause. I heard another voice, calmer, but closer. Keep talking to me, all right? You're going to be okay. I sank to my knees, sobbing. For the first time, someone had heard me. Not the version Sable curated, not the troubled teen narrative. Me. The water touched the bottom of the boxes. The air smelled metallic. The light outside bounced, flickered, then steadied again. Footsteps scrambled up the side of the house. Then the sound of a walkie-talkie crackling. One man shouted, "We've got a visual! Basement window! Partial blockage!" Another answered, "Get the gear! She said it's locked from the outside!" I let my head rest against the vent. The rain poured harder, but my words, my truth, had finally pierced the storm. I held my breath, ears straining. The creak of the door hadn't come from inside, and it hadn't come from me. It was deliberate, slow, controlled. Like someone didn't want to be heard but didn't care if I knew. That was worse. I froze, barely above water, crouched by the vent where I'd last screamed. A shape passed outside the narrow window, a blur, low to the ground. It was gone before I could catch more than a shadow. I didn't call out this time. I'd learned when to be loud and when silence was safer. My legs were cramping, soaked. The water had crept past my knees now. Each shift sent a ripple through the murky flood around me. I backed away from the window, keeping my eyes on that corner of the room like it might move again. When nothing did, I slid against the wall and tried to breathe without choking on the thick, wet air. Then, out of nowhere, the past crashed into me, like my body couldn't keep the memory locked down anymore. It wasn't the first time I'd been trapped down there. 6 months ago, I tried telling someone. It had taken me weeks to work up the courage to say it aloud, to tell an adult, any adult, that Sable had locked me in the basement once before. My hands had been shaking when I sat down in front of Ms. Durney, the school counselor. She was kind, at least I thought she was. She handed me tissues before I'd even said a word. But I did tell her. I told her everything I could manage between shallow breaths and too much shame. I think my sister's not safe. For me, I'd whispered. Ms. Durney had nodded slowly, eyes soft behind her big, round glasses. What makes you say that, Eliza? So I told her about the day it first happened. It was a Tuesday. My birthday. I was 12. I'd forgotten to clean the kitchen like I promised, and I knew she'd be mad, but I didn't expect what came next. Sable walked in while I was setting the table for my own cake. Mom wasn't home. Dad had already bailed years ago. It was just the two of us that afternoon, and I remember her voice being weirdly sweet. Come here, she said, smiling too hard. I left something in the basement for you. A surprise. I blinked. A surprise? Yeah, but you have to close your eyes. It's tradition. I knew better. I knew better. But I wanted it to be real. I wanted one day, one birthday, where she wasn't awful. So I went. I even smiled a little. She walked behind me as I headed down. Then the door slammed. Loud. Final. I screamed. Of course I did. I kicked the door. Begged. She didn't come back for 8 hours. When she did, she tossed me a peanut butter sandwich and said, "You could have gotten out. You're just too lazy to try." When I told my mother later, she didn't even lift her eyes from her magazine. Eliza, you've always had an active imagination. Don't dramatize. That night, I wrote it all down in my notebook. Then I tore the page out and burned it in the backyard. Because I didn't want anyone to find it. Because part of me believed it was my fault, too. After I told Miss Durney all of this, she nodded again. She said she'd talk to my sister. I asked her not to, but she insisted it was protocol. The next morning, Sable showed up at school in her nicest sweater, her makeup perfectly smudged to look like she'd been crying. She sat in the front office talking softly with the principal. By the time I was called in, she was already painting the story. "She's been acting out at home," Sable said. "Since our dad left, she's not been herself. I'm scared she might hurt herself or someone else." The counselor's face dropped. "We had no idea." Of course they didn't. Sable was a professional at this. By lunch, I was suspended for disruptive false accusations and concerning behavior. I spent the rest of the week in my room. No phone, no internet. Just Sable knocking on my door at odd times to whisper, "Keep talking, and next time, it won't be 8 hours." Now, knee-deep in rising water, I remembered that moment with an eerie sense of déjà vu. And yet this time, something was different. I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel crazy. I felt awake. The water lapped against my thighs. The air grew thinner, more humid. I stood slowly, pushing soaked hair from my eyes. My flashlight was nearly dead, just a soft circle of glow left, but I could still move, still think. There was no way I was dying down here. Not today. Not for her. I scanned the room, mentally cataloging everything I could use. Shelves, boxes, the old laundry sink in the far corner, my phone, useless in my back pocket, now soaked through and dead weight. My voice was shot from yelling. The walls didn't echo. Everything in that basement felt designed to muffle, to contain. I knew Sable. She thought of everything. She always had. But she also underestimated people, especially me. I climbed onto the old desk we used to store holiday junk. The water was now up to its legs. I could feel it tilting slightly beneath me. I braced one hand on the pipe overhead and forced myself to think. What would I do if this weren't happening to me? What if I were reading about a girl trapped like this? She wouldn't waste time begging. She'd find a way to leave a message, a trail. That's when I remembered. The journals. The ones I kept hidden behind the boiler. Just in case. The first was gone. I was sure. Sable had burned it when she found it last spring. But the second, that one she never saw. I wrapped it in plastic and tucked it into the vent behind the old heater. I remembered how careful I was, double knotting the bag like I'd never need it. Now I needed it more than air. I scanned the wall. There, in the far corner, above the rising water, the old vent cover still held. Rusted, but closed. If I could reach it. I dropped down into the flood and waited, pushing through the cold, gasping as it hit my ribs. I gripped the pipe along the wall and pulled myself toward the far end, using shelves and cabinets for balance. The vent was closer now. I reached it, standing on the edge of a crate, my arms barely long enough to get a grip. I tugged once, twice. The metal creaked. It gave. I reached in. Nothing. Deeper. My fingers brushed plastic. Yes, I pulled the bag free. It was soaked but intact. The journal inside still legible through the wrapping. I exhaled, pressing it to my chest. I wasn't done yet. I looked back toward the ceiling vent, where I had screamed my truth, and where someone, somewhere, had heard me. Even with the journal pressed to my chest, water sloshing at my ribs, and my legs trembling from cold, I couldn't stop shaking. Not from fear, not anymore. It was something else, something close to fury. It was the kind of rage that simmers under survival, the kind that makes your hands steady when everything around you is falling apart. I didn't move right away. I let the storm breathe. I listened for that shadow again, whoever had passed outside the window, but nothing came. The air grew heavier, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The bag in my hands felt heavier than it should have. Maybe because it wasn't just plastic and wet paper. It was proof. Truth, written in my own words. The kind of truth no one had listened to the first time, or the second, or the 10th. I wiped water from my face, not sure whether it was rain or tears anymore. Then I turned toward the wall behind me, searching for somewhere, anywhere, safe enough to place it. Somewhere it could be found if I didn't make it out. I wasn't being dramatic. That thought didn't come from a place of weakness. It was just math. The water kept rising. If the power was out, and the sump pump was dead, and no one opened that door in time, then math would win. Still clutching the journal, I climbed onto the floating desk again. The legs wobbled beneath me, one already buckling slightly from the pressure. I held onto a pipe for balance, keeping the journal high above my head, scanning the corners of the basement ceiling. I spotted a narrow vent above the breaker box, barely wide enough to shove the journal into, but just high enough that the water couldn't reach it. Not yet. I inched toward it slowly, using my elbows and one knee to stay steady. Then I reached out and wedged the journal inside the vent shaft. My fingers lingered on the bag for a second longer than necessary, like part of me wasn't ready to let it go. But I did. And just like that, it was out of my hands. I slid back down to the top of the desk, which now dipped dangerously with each movement. Then, I saw something drift by me in the water. A torn page. Just one. It floated lazily, as if it had been waiting. I leaned down, caught it before it could pass. The ink had blurred, but one sentence remained readable. If I disappear, it's not by choice. My breath hitched. That was mine. I'd written that 2 months ago, the same night I hid the journal. I remembered scribbling it after one of Sable's little performances in front of Mom, after she'd convinced her I was having another episode and needed more structure. "You're lucky to have a sister like Sable," Mom had said that night. "She's doing everything she can to keep you stable." Stable. Structured, silenced. I tucked the floating page into the band of my soaked jeans. I didn't know if it would survive the night, but I couldn't let it go either. My fingers had started to prune, my teeth were chattering, and yet my mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. Months, maybe. I hadn't planned for tonight. I wasn't psychic, but I had known something was coming. The way Sable watched me had shifted. Her smiles had gotten tighter, her words more rehearsed. She'd started dropping lines like, "You think people are going to believe you, Eliza?" And, "You keep pushing and you're going to end up hurting yourself, or worse." She never screamed, never hit. She didn't have to. She knew exactly how to make people like me look unstable. I'd spent too many hours replaying that birthday in my head, the one when she first locked me in the basement. I thought it was a fluke, a moment of cruelty she'd later pretend never happened. But cruelty, I'd learned, was a habit, not a phase, and now, in the dead of night, with the rain pounding the roof and the floor beneath me steadily vanishing, it all made sense. She had set this up, piece by piece, the new padlock, the missing charger, the coincidental power outage. Even the smell of lavender that made me groggy, something I thought was comforting, now tasted like control. I thought about the time she asked me, with that too sweet voice, "What would you do if you had to start over?" I said something dumb, like, "I don't know. I'd probably write it all down first." And she had smiled, as if that was exactly what she'd hoped I'd say. I looked back toward the vent, where the journal now sat, hidden. I whispered to myself, not for comfort, but for focus. "They're going to find it. They have to." Outside, thunder cracked again. A flash of light illuminated the window, just enough for me to see a movement. A flashlight beam. It danced across the glass, then disappeared. I sat up straighter, heart pounding again. Voices, real this time. "Basement's around back." "They said the door's sealed," I wanted to scream, but I'd used my voice too many times already. So instead, I pressed my hands to the wall, as if my skin could carry the message. "I'm here." 1 minute passed, then another. Water reached my chest. I heard footsteps thudding above me, fast and heavy. Then a bang, and another. Metal against wood, a crowbar, maybe. My body was shaking from cold now. I didn't try to stop it. Then, silence, footsteps again, closer. The door handle rattled. "Eliza?" a voice called. "Are you there?" I blinked hard, too scared to answer. Not because I didn't trust the voice, but because I couldn't believe it was real. "Eliza, we've got you," the voice said again. "We're opening the door. Just hold on." I wanted to say something, anything, but all I managed was a whisper. "The journal. It's in the vent. Don't let her lie again." The door cracked. And then, the brightest light I'd seen in hours poured into the room. I kept my back pressed against the cinder block wall, water lapping just below my shoulders. Even though the flashlight beams had faded from view, I knew someone had been there. The sound of boots scraping against gravel, the way the window had glowed for just a heartbeat, it wasn't in my head. Someone was close. I stayed still, listening. The vent above the staircase creaked again. Then faintly, the thud of car doors, shouting. Not angry, but urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but they weren't hers. That was enough to make me stay alert. And then, a voice, gravelly, older, familiar. She doesn't swim. I taught Sable, not her. Don't listen to their nonsense. If that girl's still in the house, she's not fine. Mr. Derry, my throat clenched. Of all the neighbors, he was the one Sable warned me to stay away from. He was too nosy, she said, too dramatic. He made up stories, claimed he saw things no one else did. But he saw me. Really saw me. Not the version my sister curated for teachers, church ladies, or Mom's book club. He used to bring over old gardening books when I was a kid. Show me pictures of native plants. You grow where you're allowed to, he'd say, and where you're not. Sometimes you just bust through the concrete. I almost smiled thinking about it until another voice cut through the air like a blade. Tell me where my niece is, a woman shouted, soaked, winded. The kind of voice you don't ignore, not because it's loud, but because it means every word it says. My heart skipped. Aunt Lenore. That voice had once read me bedtime stories. The only one who ever asked how I was feeling without making it sound like an accusation. She'd disappeared 2 years ago. Not literally, but Sable had stopped letting her in. Said Lenore made me unstable. Said she was poisoning the house with her energy. My mother had agreed. We don't need her drama, she'd whispered one night, pouring wine at the kitchen counter. She means well, but she brings trouble. Lenore brought truth. That's what they couldn't stand. Outside, her voice came again, sharp and direct. You have teams pulling garbage out of the creek, but no one's checked the damn basement? The air shifted. Something was happening. I pushed off the wall and waded toward the staircase, dragging my numb legs through the weight of the flood. It was harder to move now. Furniture floated into new positions, debris clung to my clothes. Above me, footsteps pounded across the floor, then halted. More voices. Closer. She's right. This door's not jammed. It's locked from the outside. Another man, younger, frantic. Over here, there's a vent. Someone's been trying to shout through it. And then I heard the clink of tools, the scrape of metal on wood. A breath caught in my throat. That sound. Real help. Not another lie. Not another trap disguised as rescue. Not another sister's voice pretending to cry. I didn't cry. Not this time. I pulled myself back toward the desk, climbed to where I'd hidden the journal. My fingers traced the edge of the vent, now slightly warped from the damp. I whispered to it, not because I thought it could hear, but because I needed to say it out loud. Find this, please. Let someone believe it. The thudding above grew louder. Grunts, labored effort. Then, a crack. The door began to splinter. I heard someone curse under their breath, the kind of honest frustration that only comes when something actually needs breaking. Eliza, a voice called out. Male, unfamiliar, but grounded. If you can hear me, back away from the door. We're getting you out. I backed toward the corner, hands still shaking. I didn't trust my voice enough to answer, so I tapped the pipe twice, loud, steady, then silence. One final slam, and the door cracked open. A burst of light flooded the basement, making me flinch. My eyes stung. A firefighter stepped in, water to his thighs. His expression was equal parts disbelief and urgency. Got her, he shouted. She's here! I didn't move. Not until another man followed, wearing a navy raincoat, and said, it was locked from the outside, just like she said. Just like I said. They lifted me out gently, voices calm, no false sympathy. Just action. Someone threw a blanket around my shoulders. My ears rang. I caught snippets. She was trapped. Doesn't line up with the family's statement. Journal? In the vent? I tried to nod. One of them must have found it already. Or maybe they would. They carried me out onto the lawn. The storm had lightened, but the air was thick with leftover chaos. Hoses, radio chatter, flashing lights. I blinked against the wind. And there she was. Sable, standing on the porch in my hoodie, her arms folded like she'd just come back from a jog. Her expression was picture-perfect concern, but her eyes, they told the truth. They always had. I just hadn't been strong enough to say it out loud before. Behind her, Mom hovered like a ghost, mouthing something to a responder, probably explaining how her fragile daughter had gotten herself stuck, how I had episodes. But something shifted, because people were watching now, not just glancing, looking, really looking. One of the officers pointed at the lock. Fresh install. From the outside, screws still have silver dust. Sable's eyes flicked toward it, then back to me. She opened her mouth, probably to spin another version of the story. And that's when Lenore stepped between us. "Not this time," she said. Calm, clear, resolute. "You've talked enough." Sable flinched, just barely. The EMTs guided me toward the ambulance. As they took my vitals, I saw another firefighter holding the journal. He held it like it mattered, like it meant something. And for once, it did. This wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't alone. By the time the sunlight broke through the bedroom window of the hospital room, I was already awake. Not because I'd had a restful sleep. My body was too sore, too stiff, too full of images that wouldn't let me rest, but because my mind had moved to a different gear. Survival mode had ended. The real work was just beginning. A nurse I didn't recognize, short, kind eyes, quiet voice, came in around 7:15. She adjusted the IV drip and checked the monitor. "You're lucky, sweetheart," she said softly. "Water that cold, that long, could have done a lot more damage." I nodded, still watching the ceiling. Lucky wasn't the word I'd use, but I wasn't going to waste energy correcting people today. As she moved around the room, I heard murmurs from the hallway, something about the police, something about the mother not cooperating. My stomach twisted. I hadn't seen Mom yet. Not once. Not that I expected her to come rushing in. The nurse left with a pat on my shoulder. I turned my head slightly, catching a glimpse of the chair near the door, and the man sitting there, watching me. Not a doctor, not family. Something colder, more alert. "Detective Garcia," he said after a pause. "You're safe. We're not here to interrogate you, but I do have some questions. When you're ready." I appreciated the tone. No babying, no fake warmth. He handed me a small notebook and said, "Whenever you feel like writing down anything, details, things you remember, this is for you. You don't have to talk if you're not ready." I took it, more grateful for the silence that followed than anything else. The door opened again. I turned toward it instinctively and froze, sable, hair pulled back. No makeup, a sweatshirt a size too large. She looked soft, harmless. She looked like someone's big sister who just found out her sibling had been in an accident. She let out a sharp, shaky breath, one that sounded perfectly rehearsed. "Eliza," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "Oh my God, I've been so worried." Detective Garcia straightened, stepped back half a foot to give her room, but didn't leave. He watched, studied. I said nothing. She took a step closer, glancing toward the nurse's station before leaning in. "I didn't know," she said quietly, eyes damp. "They told me you went down to check the breaker and—" "I didn't," I said, cutting her off. My voice surprised me, clear, steady, loud enough to silence the rest of the room. Detective Garcia shifted slightly, just enough to let me know he was listening. "I never touched the breaker," I added. "I was asleep. I woke up to water in my room. Then I went down, and the door locked behind me." Sable blinked slowly. "You think I did that?" she whispered. "Eliza?" "I know you did." She didn't flinch, just stared at me like I'd just slapped her. "Eliza," she said again, gentler, coaxing. "You're confused. It's okay. You've been under a lot of stress." Garcia interrupted then. "Miss Dorian, I'll have to ask you to step outside for a moment." She turned on the tears instantly. "Please. She's my sister." He didn't blink. And you're not under arrest, yet, but you're not her doctor, and you're not her lawyer. So, unless she's asking for you, you're leaving. That was when she finally broke character, just a bit. Her jaw clenched. She turned and walked out, head down, hand clutching her phone like it might offer her an escape route. The door clicked shut behind her. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Garcia gave me a look. Flat, unreadable. "She's good," he said. "She's practiced," I corrected. He nodded once. "We'll be back." I was alone again. For a while. It was quiet, save for the occasional beep of the monitor. But not for long. Voices rose outside my room again. I recognized one, sharp, shrill, cracking under pressure. My mother. "She said it was just to teach her a lesson," Mom told someone. "That's all. She didn't say she locked her in. She said Eliza just got scared and overreacted." I closed my eyes. "She's always been emotional," she continued. "You know how teenagers are. They imagine things." "Mrs. Kane," Garcia's voice cut through her ramble like a razor. "There was a lock on the outside of the basement door, installed recently, with no interior mechanism. That doesn't happen by accident." There was a pause. Then, softer, I heard my mother sigh. "I didn't think she meant harm. I thought she was just trying to keep Eliza safe. You don't understand how much pressure Sable's been under." She nearly drowned. That silenced the hallway. I rolled onto my side, pulling the blanket tighter. 10 minutes later, the door opened again. Not Sable. Not Mom. Garcia again, this time holding something in his hand. A laptop. "We got a warrant," he said simply. "This was in your sister's room?" He sat beside the bed and opened the screen. "We found a folder labeled Insurance. Inside were PDF files, fake therapist reports, mental health assessments, a fake letter from a clinic that doesn't exist. All of them paint you as unstable, depressive, emotionally manipulative. One even suggested you'd made suicidal threats." I didn't answer. "They're dated weeks before the flood," he added, "and she never showed these to any school, doctor, or court. It was just there, hidden, for leverage." Still, I said nothing. "There are also emails," he continued, scrolling, "to a friend named Dana, talking about how she needs to control the narrative before you ruin everything. She mentioned the insurance policy in one. He didn't say the amount. I didn't ask. Instead, I looked at the screen, at the open inbox with subject lines like, RE, control her, and she's not going to win. "She planned it," I said finally. Garcia didn't nod, didn't agree or disagree. "I want her gone," I added. "Not just out of my room, out of my life." He closed the laptop, stood. "We're working on it." As he reached the door, he paused. "You're not crazy, Eliza. I know people probably told you that 1,000 times, but they were wrong." I didn't say thank you, but something in my chest loosened just a bit. He left, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove I wasn't the problem. They thought I was broken, an unstable, emotional girl who would eventually retreat into silence. But what they didn't see coming was that once you stop trying to convince people you're not the problem, you free up a lot of energy to actually fight. I was discharged later that morning, only after 3 separate evaluations and some intense persuading from Detective Garcia. The hospital insisted on sending me home with a trauma specialist's number, a stack of printed resources I knew I'd never read, and a paper bag with my torn jeans and hoodie. I changed in silence, breathing deep, moving slow. My muscles still ached, but my mind, sharper than ever. By the time we pulled into the driveway of the Kane house, 2 marked patrol cars were already parked out front. Their presence didn't rattle me. What did shake me, briefly, was seeing my little brother Noah sitting on the porch steps with his knees drawn to his chest, eyes darting between officers and his own shoelaces. He looked small, smaller than I remembered, but not because he'd shrunk. I think I'd just started seeing clearly. Detective Garcia opened his door and gave me a quiet nod. "This is your show now," he said. "Say what you need. We'll handle the rest." I stepped out slowly, the humidity hitting me like a wall. Louisiana air always carried weight, but today it felt heavier than the flood itself. As I made my way toward the porch, Noah spotted me and stood up so fast he nearly tripped. "Eliza," he whispered. I stopped a few feet from him. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he blurted it out, just like that. "I saw her do it. That night." I blinked. "What?" He swallowed hard, eyes darting to the front door. "I saw Sable go to the basement. I was in the hallway. She had the screwdriver and that dumb new lock she said was for the shed, but—" He stopped, voice cracking. "She told me if I said anything, she'd tell Mom I was the one who broke her laptop," he continued, barely above a whisper. "She said no one would believe me anyway." He looked up at me with guilt so raw it almost knocked the breath out of me. "I'm sorry." For a moment, I wanted to wrap my arms around him, tell him it wasn't his fault. But instead, I took a slow breath and said the one thing he needed to hear. "You just did the right thing." Behind us, one of the officers nodded and walked toward the house. The other stayed back, watching. Noah sat again, pulling his knees tighter. I let him be. Inside, everything felt too clean, too staged. Sable's handiwork. Candles still sat on the kitchen counter, untouched. The floor had been mopped, the windows open to let the smell of bleach out. No one cleaned like that unless they had something to erase. Mom was in the living room, arms crossed, wearing that expression she reserved for things she didn't want to deal with. I didn't speak to her. Not yet. Instead, I followed Garcia down the hall toward Sable's room, where two officers were already sifting through drawers and lifting loose floorboards. One of them held something up, a cream-colored envelope, neatly sealed. "This yours?" he asked. I nodded before I even read it. The handwriting was mine. My name. My old school's address. He handed it to me. I stared at the stamp, unmarked, no post office date. I tore it open with shaky fingers. It was the transfer request. 2 months ago, I'd filled it out after a particularly cruel dinner. Sable had called me a burden, told me I was ruining Mom's health, that maybe it was time I found a place better suited for people like you. I'd written the letter that night, asked to move in with Aunt Lenore, typed it on the old computer, printed it, sealed it, and left it on the kitchen table for Mom. She'd never mentioned it. And now here it was, unopened, hidden in Sable's drawer. "She stopped it before I could even leave," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. Garcia gave me a glance. No pity, just understanding. I turned and walked back into the living room. Mom was still standing there. She didn't ask where I'd gone, didn't ask what I'd found. I stepped in front of her and held up the envelope. "Did you know?" I asked. Her lips pressed into a line. "Did you see this?" I said louder. Still no answer. I lowered my hand. "You did." She didn't look at me, just stared past me, like I was someone else's problem. I exhaled. "Then you don't get to tell my story anymore." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. Back in the dining room, Garcia motioned for me to sit at the table. A small recorder already sat on the wood. He pulled out a chair and placed a notepad beside it. "Whenever you're ready," he said. I sat, adjusted the chair, took a breath. Then I spoke. "I was asleep when the storm started," I began, voice even. "The power had gone out, but I didn't think much of it. When I woke up, water was already coming through the carpet. I grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs to check the sump pump." I didn't pause. She was waiting, not physically, but the lock. She'd installed it the day before. I didn't notice. I didn't know. My voice didn't tremble, not once. She knew I'd go down there. She made sure I couldn't come back up. Garcia scribbled a note, then looked up. "You believe she wanted you to die?" I didn't blink. "She wanted me gone. And if dying made that easier, I think she was okay with it." He nodded once, then gestured toward the notebook. "Anything else?" I reached into my backpack and handed him a folded piece of paper. A copy of the journal page, the one that read, "If I disappear, it's not by choice." "She wanted to make sure I had no way out," I said. "But I found one." He looked at the page, and this time, he did nod. We sat in silence for a few seconds before he turned off the recorder. "No more whispers, Eliza." I nodded. "No more." The officer's voice echoed in my head long after he left the room. She tried to erase your voice, but forgot that evidence echoes louder than lies. I had replayed it over and over in my mind as I sat in the back of the squad car that afternoon, parked in front of the precinct's side entrance, waiting for them to prep the evidence room. The air conditioner in the cruiser blew too cold, and yet I didn't ask them to turn it down. I welcomed the chill. It helped me stay present, grounded. By the time the sun dipped behind the courthouse steeple across the street, we were already walking into the narrow side hallway, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Detective Garcia walked just a step ahead of me. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. My hands were steady. My spine, straight. This wasn't like before, when I told the school counselor Sable had locked me in the basement years ago, and they'd responded by calling her in for a check-in. When my mother whispered, "She's always been dramatic," like I wasn't even in the room. This time, we had something they couldn't talk over. This time, the room would listen. Inside the evidence viewing chamber, 3 officers stood already, one of them holding a flash drive the size of a fingertip. "He just walked in," the officer said, nodding toward Garcia. "Didn't say much, just handed it over and said, 'You'll want to see this.'" "Who?" Garcia asked. "Neighbor," the officer replied. "Older guy, white hair, said his cameras caught some strange behavior around the Kane house, especially at night." My breath caught. Mr. Derry, of course. Sable had always complained he was nosy, that he was one step away from losing it. But what she really meant was, he noticed too much. The officer slid the flash drive into the laptop, and the first file opened. The room fell silent. The footage began from 2 weeks before the flood. Midnight clips, time-stamped and labeled. Grainy video, yes, but enough detail to feel it in your bones. There she was. Sable. Wearing her favorite gray hoodie, the one with the university crest she never earned, standing in our backyard. The motion sensor lights flicked on. She didn't flinch. In one clip, she yanked the blinds in the living room down aggressively after glancing outside, eyes scanning. In another, she stood on the back porch, arms crossed, watching the window that led into my bedroom. She stood there for nearly 3 full minutes before turning and disappearing inside. "She's patrolling," one officer muttered. "She's not checking for intruders. She's checking for witnesses." Another video showed her in the middle of the night, creeping through the yard with a screwdriver in hand. Her face was calm, precise. She opened the basement door, walked down the steps, then returned and closed it, locked it, checked it twice. No rush, no fear of being seen. "She doesn't look like someone dealing with a mental health crisis," the officer beside me said flatly. "She looks like someone executing a plan." Garcia nodded, then clicked to the final file, the one labeled Flood Night, 2:12 a.m., and then I saw it. Sable. Standing by the shed in her boots, hair pulled into a low braid, rain poured around her. She wasn't wearing a raincoat, she didn't even look wet. She walked across the backyard with calm, measured steps. The wind blew her braid to one side. She didn't look at the house. She went straight to the basement door, opened it, held it open. The image shook slightly. Mr. Derry must have bumped the camera. But it was clear enough to see her lips move as she said something I couldn't hear. She looked around once, then closed the door, pulled something from her pocket, a lock. She slid it into place, clicked it shut, turned her back, and walked away without a glance behind her. The audio picked up one thing, faint but unmistakable. My voice. A scream. Cut off the moment the door shut. The room was so still, I could hear someone breathing 3 feet away. Then quietly, one of the younger officers said, "That wasn't neglect." Garcia didn't blink. That was intent. I didn't cry. Instead, I stared at the screen until the image burned behind my eyes. She had known what she was doing. She had planned every part of it, and she had done it with a calmness that would terrify most people. But not me, because I had lived it. I turned to Garcia. "What now?" "We bring her in," he said. "This takes it from reckless endangerment to premeditated." A pause. Then he added, "She's going to lose everything." I shook my head. She already lost me. they brought her into the station later that evening. Not with handcuffs, yet, but with a level of tension that changed the temperature of the room the moment she walked in. Sable still wore that same gray hoodie. Her face looked pale under the fluorescent lights, like maybe, just maybe, she knew the mask was slipping. When she spotted me sitting across the room, she hesitated. For half a second, her mouth parted like she might cry, or plead, or spin one more beautiful lie. But she didn't speak, and neither did I. Garcia stepped forward and asked her to take a seat. "We have video footage," he said simply. She blinked. "Footage of what?" "Of you locking the basement door." Her eyes flicked to me, then back to him. "I never—" He held up a hand. "You don't have to say anything. In fact, I'd suggest you don't." For once, she listened. I watched her face as the truth landed. Not all at once. Not like a slap. More like a slow sinking, like a flood in reverse, dragging everything down. Her shoulders lowered. Her mouth closed. No tears. No performance. Just the quiet understanding that it was over. She tried to erase my voice, but the cameras remembered everything. The echo of the footage haunted the room even after the screen went black. No one spoke. Not Garcia, not the tech team, not even the clerk who had been tapping away at his keyboard until that last recording ended. Sable's face, cold, calculated, lingered in everyone's mind like a shadow that refused to leave. The click of the padlock, the deliberate turn of her back, the absence of hesitation. When they finally escorted me out of the evidence room and into the hallway, the sun had started dipping below the courthouse roof. The air outside had that strange heaviness of early evening in Baton Rouge, moisture hanging mid-air like an unspoken thought. Garcia leaned over and whispered, "They're filing formal charges within the hour." I nodded, unsure how to respond. The word relieved didn't fit. Nothing about this felt clean or victorious. 3 weeks passed between that moment and the courtroom. 3 weeks filled with interviews, statements, subpoenas, and silence from people who used to praise Sable's ambition and charisma. Suddenly, they didn't remember what she said at the church fundraiser or who she posed with at the neighborhood barbecue. Selective amnesia is a powerful thing in small towns, but not everyone stayed quiet. It was Officer Daniels, one of the first responders during the flood, who lit the final match. "We're trained to spot patterns," he said on the stand, his voice steady. And she didn't look like a girl caught in a flood. She looked like someone who had been left in a cell. I sat in the back row with Lenore beside me, fingers laced together tightly in my lap. Noah sat on my other side, knees bouncing. He hadn't said a word all morning. Daniels continued, "I've seen neglect. I've seen panic. This wasn't either." The judge asked him to clarify, and he did, clearly, simply, "This was premeditated." That report was what cracked open the case wide enough for the jury to stop squinting and start seeing. Then came the evidence. They started with the body cam recording, the faint, gasping voice, "My sister wants me dead," followed by the calm reply from the firefighter, "We're coming, Eliza. Hold on." Then they moved to the journal entries. Pages stained, words smudged, but still legible. My words. My handwriting. "She's building a case against me, and no one's stopping her." Then came the emails. Prosecutor Sharp, a woman with ice in her voice and steel in her spine, held up a printed chain. "In this message," she said, addressing the jury, "Sable Dorian writes to a friend. She's gonna slip eventually. I just need to make sure no one questions the narrative when it happens." She let that hang in the air a beat longer than necessary. Next was the camera footage, the crown jewel, the one no one could explain away. Sable's attorney tried. They said she was checking for water damage, securing the home, doing her due diligence. That the scream caught in the audio could have come from a neighbor. That the lock had been misunderstood. Sharp didn't flinch. "This wasn't an accident," she said during closing arguments. "This wasn't a mistake. This was an execution, delayed by rain." The courtroom was so still I could hear someone shift in their seat 2 rows back. When the jury left to deliberate, Lenore finally exhaled beside me. I hadn't even realized she'd been holding her breath. It took them 4 hours. When they returned, their faces were tight. Some avoided looking toward the defense table. Others didn't bother. The foreperson stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge adjusted his glasses before speaking. You were trusted to protect, he said, staring at Sable. You chose to punish. This court finds you guilty of attempted murder, felony endangerment, and criminal fraud. You are hereby sentenced to 30 years in state custody without the possibility of parole. Sable didn't react, not at first. No gasp, no tears. She just stared. I'd seen that look before. When we were children, and I'd caught her stealing Mom's wedding ring from the jewelry box. She'd stared at me like that then, too. Blank, not defiant, not ashamed, just gone. That was the last time I saw her. She was escorted out of the courtroom in cuffs, wrists low at her sides, steps slow and resigned. Outside, reporters waited. They swarmed around the exit, cameras flashing like it was a red carpet event. The moment I stepped out with Lenore, microphones were pushed toward me. Miss Kane, would you like to say something? Do you feel justice was served? What would you tell other young women in your position? I paused for just a second. The words came easily, even though I hadn't rehearsed them. She tried to lock me away, I said, but the water rose faster than her lies. Then I kept walking. That night, I sat on Lenore's couch, wrapped in a blanket that didn't smell like mildew or lavender oil. She made tea, something herbal, nothing fancy, and sat across from me. No words, just company. Noah came over later, bringing a card he made at school. It had a picture of a flood, drawn in crayon, with stick figures and one speech bubble that said, "I'm glad you're okay." I hung it on the fridge. The courthouse verdict didn't undo the damage. It didn't fix the years of manipulation, or give me back the birthdays I spent wondering if I was crazy, but it gave me space to breathe. And that was more than I thought I'd get. The spring came early that year. The air in Baton Rouge softened by March, and the damp heaviness that used to sit in my chest whenever I walked outside had started to lift. It had been a year. 1 year since the flood. 1 year since the lock. 1 year since the truth cracked open and refused to be buried again. The house I lived in now wasn't big. It didn't have polished floors or matching appliances. The walls were uneven in places, and the guest bathroom door stuck every time it rained. But it was safe. It was mine. I lived with Aunt Lenore on the edge of town, close enough to hear the highway, but far enough that I could sleep through the night without headlights dancing across the ceiling. My bedroom had 2 windows that stayed open most days, and a lock on the inside I had installed myself. Not because I needed it, but because I chose to. That room became something I never thought I'd have again. A place no one tried to rewrite who I was. On most mornings, I'd wake to the smell of coffee and Lenore humming some old Motown tune as she made her tea. She never hovered, never asked too many questions, just existed, steady and warm, like a grounding cord I didn't know I needed. That morning, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, I decided it was time to finish going through the last box from the old house, the one labeled Eliza's Things, scribbled in Sharpie across the side. It had sat untouched in the corner of my closet for months. I'd moved it twice, once when I reorganized my bookshelf, and again when I needed space for winter coats. But I hadn't opened it. Not until now. I pulled it onto the floor, exhaling as I cut the old packing tape. The cardboard flaps gave easily. On top, there were birthday cards, half still in their envelopes, signed in Mom's looping cursive. Love you always, even when you're being difficult. One had a $5 bill still tucked inside. Below that were school awards. Most improved, perfect attendance, outstanding effort. None of them had ever made it to the wall. I smiled wryly, brushing dust off the corners. Then I found it. A plain, wrinkled envelope. No stamp, no return address, just my name in uneven pencil strokes. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single folded sheet, faded with time. If I disappear, please look for me. I wouldn't leave you, I promise. I stared at it for a long time. I remembered writing it, maybe 7 years old, hiding under the dining table while Sable screamed at Mom for not buying the right yogurt. I had felt invisible even then, like my voice was too soft for that house. I tucked the note into my journal, next to the page I'd copied from the one they'd found in the basement. Somehow, those two scraps of paper carried the whole arc of my life, who I was and who I refused to be anymore. Later that day, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and a bowl of leftover gumbo. I hadn't planned to go looking, but curiosity crept in while I scrolled through local news. I found it by accident, a real estate article about recent foreclosures in the area. The Kane house was listed, empty, abandoned, grass growing too high in the front, mold warnings posted on the door. There was a photo of the living room. It had clearly been taken for evidence. Behind the cracked mantel was a family portrait: Mom, Sable, and Noah. I wasn't in it. Not cropped out, just never included. The date stamp said it was taken 3 years ago. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just closed the tab. That night, I stood in front of a room full of folding chairs and women who looked just like I had, tired, cornered, and desperate for a story that didn't end with defeat. It was my first time speaking to a trauma support group, organized by the local women's shelter and hosted at the community library. There were no cameras, no reporters, just people. I started simply, "My name is Eliza Kane," I said, holding the microphone loosely. "And a year ago, I nearly drowned in a house I was supposed to feel safe in." The room held its breath. "I was locked in a basement during a flood," I continued. "They called it an accident. She called it a misunderstanding. But I knew better. I didn't list every moment. I didn't need to. I spent years being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too unstable. But the truth?" I let the silence sit a moment longer. The truth has a way of floating back up, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. A woman in the back nodded slowly. Another reached for a tissue. "I used to think survival meant staying quiet," I said. "But now I know. It means speaking when it's hardest." I ended with the line I'd been writing and rewriting in my journal for weeks. They tried to trap me in silence, but I turned that silence into a voice. Afterward, a few women came up to thank me. One gave me a hug and whispered, "I didn't know anyone else ever wrote letters like that." On the ride home, Lenore didn't say much. She just turned the radio low and handed me a bottle of water. "You did good, kid," she finally said at a red light. I smiled. "I didn't feel scared." "You didn't look scared." Back home, I curled up in bed with my journal in my lap. The same journal that once held my fear now held my freedom. I flipped to the last page, pressed the pen against the paper, and whispered to no one but myself. "Some wounds stay, but so do I." Sometimes the people we fear most aren't strangers. They're the ones who share our last name. Eliza's story reminds us that healing doesn't always come from justice served in court, but from reclaiming your own voice after years of silence. How many others are still trapped in stories written by someone else? If this story resonated with you or made you think of someone, you're not alone. What would you do if the person you trusted most turned out to be the one trying to erase you? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-inspired stories like this one. Hello? My name's Nadina, and this isn't a story about war, not the kind I was trained for. I came back from serving overseas, only to find a different kind of battlefield. My mother, on the floor, my brother, fists raised, eyes full of rage, his wife laughing with her family on speakerphone, like my mother's pain was some kind of joke. They told everyone I left them, but behind closed doors, they were erasing me and rewriting our family story without me in it. How did it go from Christmas memories to police reports? How do you fight for someone who's too scared to ask for help? And how do you get your home back when it's been turned against you? Let me tell you what happened. The snow fell in heavy sheets, blanketing everything in white as I stepped out of the cab and onto the sidewalk in front of the house I used to call home. The street was quieter than I remembered, no kids playing, no barking dogs. Just the sound of tires crunching over packed snow and the distant hum of an engine dying out. It had been 3 years since I last stood here, in Billings, Montana. 3 years since I'd boarded a bus in full uniform, trying not to look back. Now there was no uniform. Just a heavy winter coat, my old army duffel, and boots that weren't military issue anymore. Civilian. Like me. Supposedly. I stood at the gate, the air biting through my scarf, and blinked up at the house. Something was wrong. Not the structure. It still had the same pale blue siding and the wooden porch Dad had built. But the sign, where it used to read the Rayburn home, it now said Curtis Vera May Rayburn Family Residence. A glossy brass plate, bolted in with care. I froze. Just stood there staring at it, my heart thudding hard. My name was gone. Our parents' names were gone. Just Curtis and Vera May. I double-checked the address, although I didn't need to. I'd memorized every crack in the sidewalk here, every bush along the fence line. Still, I looked again, willing it to be a mistake, but it wasn't. No one had told me. No one had warned me. I opened the gate slowly. It creaked like it always had. That sound used to make me smile. Now, it sounded like something breaking. I walked up the porch steps, trying to convince myself it didn't matter. Maybe they were just showing off. Maybe Vera had a flair for making things official, overdoing things as she always had. Maybe it was harmless, but it didn't feel harmless. It felt intentional. I turned the knob, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The warmth inside hit me like a wave, and for a split second, I was back in middle school, throwing off my backpack, hollering for Mom. I almost called out. Then I heard it. A crash, sharp, wood on wood, furniture tipping over. Then Mom's voice. "Please, Curtis, please, just give me a second. I'll fix it." "I didn't mean to, please." Her voice cracked, small and terrified. I dropped my bag. From the hallway, I moved in slow, controlled steps. My body knew what to do before I could think. Shoulders low, breathing even. I scanned as I moved, walls still the same. The family photos along the hallway, gone, replaced with Vera's modern art prints and pictures of her kids. My stomach twisted. Then I reached the living room, and everything inside me went cold. Curtis had Mom pinned in the corner near the bookcase. She was on the floor, shielding her face with both hands, her body curled inwards. His fist came down again, hard. She whimpered, her voice barely a whisper. "You think you can control me?" Curtis snarled. "After everything I've done for you, you ungrateful old hag?" On the couch, Vera May sat with a phone on speaker. Loud laughter came through. Somebody on the other end was laughing like this was a show. "She crying already?" A woman's voice cackled. "What a weak old thing." Vera didn't respond, just chuckled and looked toward the kitchen like she was debating getting a snack. My throat clenched, but I didn't speak. My fingers found the inside of my coat pocket, curling around the cool edge of my phone. I didn't pull it out, didn't yell, didn't lunge. I stood still. I let the scene burn itself into memory. The overturned lamp on the floor, the torn pages from the photo album that used to be on the coffee table, Mom's slipper, twisted and far from her feet, Curtis's wristwatch catching the light mid-swing, Vera's smirk, the sound of that woman on the phone calling my mother pathetic. They hadn't noticed me yet. That gave me seconds. Seconds I used to breathe, to commit, to ready myself. Curtis raised his arm again. "Don't stop on my account," I said, voice low, cold, louder than I intended. It sliced through the room like glass shattering. He froze mid-motion, his fist hanging in the air. Then he turned slowly, like his limbs weighed too much. When our eyes met, his mouth parted slightly. I saw the flicker, shock, calculation, then resentment, like I was the one intruding, like I was the problem. He dropped his hand. "Nadina," he said. That was all. Not "your home," not "how long have you been standing there?" Just my name. Flat, defensive. Behind him, Mom peeked through her arms, her eyes wide and wet. Her mouth trembled. I took a step forward. Curtis tensed, but I didn't move toward him. Instead, I looked him up and down once, then over to Vera, who had finally turned to me with a lazy arch of her brow. "I said," I repeated, "don't stop. You looked like you were enjoying yourself." The silence that followed was heavy, thick. Curtis's face flushed, his chest rising unevenly. Vera didn't laugh this time. I looked down at my mother, then back up. "Guess the nameplate was right," I said. "I'm not family here anymore, just a witness." Curtis opened his mouth, but I was already turning around. Not to run, not to leave, but to find where they'd hidden my mother's phone, her medications, and the dignity they tried to erase. Curtis blinked, like I'd slapped him with my words instead of my hand. He stood stiff, breathing shallow, his eyes darting to Vera May, who didn't flinch, just sipped from her wine glass like nothing had happened. My mother was still on the floor, curled in on herself. She tried to sit up, wiping at her face with trembling fingers. "He just got angry," she mumbled. "It's not his fault. I forgot to—" Her voice trailed off like even she didn't believe the words. I didn't answer her. I knelt beside her quietly, my hands steady as I helped her to her feet. The heat coming off her cheek was unnatural. The bruising would be deep by morning. She smelled like lotion and menthol and fear. Curtis didn't apologize. Not with his mouth. His silence screamed louder than anything. And Vera? She turned the phone off speaker, but not before I heard someone on the line say, "Well, that party got dull fast." They hung up with a laugh. Curtis said, "You should have called if you were coming." "I did," I said. "Twice." He shrugged. "Must have missed it." I looked at Mom. "Did you know I was coming?" She shook her head no. That told me everything. I helped her sit on the couch, and when I stood again, the silence felt thick. I told myself I'd only stay a day, just to make sure she was okay. But I knew I was lying to myself. Vera plastered on a fake smile, like nothing happened. "You'll stay for dinner, right? I've got pot roast in the oven. Curtis loves my recipe." I didn't answer. I just looked around the room. The space that used to feel like childhood, warm, cluttered, safe, now looked like a showroom. Cold, too clean, sanitized of memory. I moved toward the hallway, past the staircase, the old coat closet. I needed to see if anything of mine still existed in this house. The hallway used to be lined with family photos. Me, Curtis, Mom, and Dad. Birthday parties, Sunday church outfits, Christmas mornings. But now? The walls were decorated with Vera's kids and their dog. Frames matched. Backgrounds staged. Smiles wide. Not a trace of me anywhere. I opened the door to what used to be my bedroom. It was painted soft gray now. A guest room. Neutral. No books, no trophies, no leftover posters, just a bed, a side table, and a lamp with a cracked base. I wasn't just uninvited, I had been erased. I stepped back into the hallway, heart heavier than my duffel, and saw Vera setting the table. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew she belonged. "Hope you're hungry," she called over her shoulder. "I made extra." Curtis leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching. Not a word of apology. I took a seat on the far end of the living room and tried to breathe. Soon, Vera was announcing, "Dinner's ready." I didn't want to join them, but I needed to be in the room, to witness it, to understand the depth of what I was really walking into. The table had 6 chairs, one for Curtis, one for Vera, one for each of her 2 kids, one for Mom, no chair for me. Vera looked around and said, "Oh shoot, we're one short." "Hold on." She walked to the laundry room and came back with a plastic stool, the kind you'd use to reach a high shelf. She plunked it down near the sink and smiled. "It's all we have. Hope that's okay?" Curtis chuckled under his breath. His son smirked. I didn't say a word. I sat on the stool. My knees almost touched the sink. Vera began spooning food onto plates like she didn't just humiliate me. Mom sat across from me, eyes fixed on her plate, silent. Curtis passed around the roast like nothing happened, like I hadn't walked in on him assaulting our mother. He even asked if someone could turn on the game in the other room. I was the ghost at the table. Present, but unwanted. I chewed slowly. I didn't taste a thing. While they laughed about a local bake sale, I studied every inch of them. I watched Curtis's hands, how steady they were now. I watched Vera's sideways glances, her performative grin. I watched my mother slowly shrink into her seat. And I remembered. Curtis teaching me to ride a bike in this very driveway. How he told me to stop being afraid of falling. How he picked me up every time I scraped my knee. I remembered baking cookies with Mom, her wearing that yellow apron with the sunflower on it, flour on her nose. But now, Now Curtis used those same hands to threaten the woman who raised us. And now, Vera wore that apron. I saw it hanging near the stove, like a trophy. None of it was theirs, but they'd taken it anyway. I swallowed the knot in my throat. This wasn't just a family dinner. This was a performance, a ceremony of domination. I wasn't just a guest, I was an intruder. And yet, I said nothing. Not yet. When the dishes were cleared and the TV was turned on for background noise, I stood. My plate was untouched. I looked at Curtis first, then Vera, then Mom. "This used to be my house," I said. "Now it's your playground." But I remember everything. And I walked out of the dining room. Not in retreat. In preparation. Mom didn't say a word when I helped her to bed that night. She sat quietly at the edge of the mattress, brushing invisible dust from her blanket like she had something to do with her hands, but no idea what it was. I tucked the Afghan around her legs just to have an excuse to linger. Her eyes stayed on her lap. I knew that look. It wasn't sadness. It was survival. It was the look people wore when they'd accepted something awful just to stay breathing. Curtis passed by in the hallway, eyes averted, not a word. Vera didn't even acknowledge me when I walked past the kitchen, though I caught a glimpse of her whispering into her phone again, her voice low but sharp. She was always whispering. Once the house had gone quiet, TV off, lights dimmed, the familiar creak of floorboards stilled, I slipped out to the porch. The air outside was heavy with snow again, soft flakes tumbling through the glow of the porch light. I sat on the old swing, the one Dad built. It groaned faintly beneath my weight. Same as it used to. Inside, laughter drifted from the back room. Curtis must have turned the TV back on after I left. Probably some late-night sitcom or sports recap. All white noise, all pretend. I stared out at the dark street, the parked cars half buried in snowbanks. Something in my gut told me this wasn't some brief slip. Curtis losing his temper, Vera being rude. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a pattern. And patterns don't change unless something breaks them. When my fingers started going numb, I stood up and quietly stepped back into the house. Lights were off in the hallway. Curtis and Vera's door was closed. The kids were already asleep, their bedroom door cracked with a faint glow from a nightlight. I tiptoed toward Mom's room. She was out cold, one arm hanging off the bed, her breathing deep but irregular. I opened her dresser drawer. The one on the far left. I used to sneak candy from it when I was a kid. She always kept her important stuff there. Church bulletins, expired coupons, family letters. And sure enough, beneath a stack of old bank statements, I found a manila envelope. Inside were papers, a lot of them. Some were legal-looking, with seals and signatures. Others were handwritten notes with numbers, check marks. I thumbed through the stack until one caught my eye. Transfer of ownership. Property title and land use. My mom's name scrawled at the bottom in shaky penmanship. Above it, bold letters. Recipient, Curtis Rayburn. The date was 3 months ago, but that wasn't what made me stop breathing. There was a smear of something dark near her signature. At first, I thought it was ink, but it wasn't. It was dried blood. A fingerprint, partial, right where her hand would have rested if she had to steady herself. She didn't sign this because she wanted to. She signed it because she had to. I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers trembling, not with fear, but with something sharper, not anger. Precision, the kind of stillness that comes just before a plan. I carefully folded the paper back into the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of my coat. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, not without more. I moved to her nightstand next. I needed to find her phone. Something about the way she'd said she didn't know I was coming, it didn't sit right. But there was nothing on the table but a lamp and her reading glasses. I opened the drawer, tissues, a half-used bottle of lavender lotion, a pack of gum, no phone. I stepped into the hallway and peeked into the living room, where Vera had been earlier. There was a phone charger on the side table, but no phone plugged into it. Then I checked the kitchen counter. That's when I found it. Tucked beside the bread box was an old flip phone, the kind no one uses anymore. Small, scratched, half dead. I pressed the power button. It didn't light up. I opened the back. No SIM card. Empty. Like her. They'd given her a phone just for show, just in case someone asked, something to wave around and say, "See, she's connected." But she wasn't. She was cut off, on purpose. I remembered something Vera said earlier in the week. We tried a smartphone, but she couldn't figure it out. It's just easier this way. That wasn't care. That was control. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and returned to Mom's room. She hadn't moved, but she stirred a little when I sat beside her. Her voice was soft, barely audible. "You shouldn't pick a fight," she whispered, eyes still closed. "They'll throw me out if you make trouble." I took her hand gently. "What if?" I said slowly. "I threw them out first." She didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. I stayed with her until her breathing evened again. Then I stood, walked into the hallway, and closed the door gently behind me. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the guest room, my old room turned guest room, on the edge of the bed that didn't feel like mine. The walls were gray, the shelves bare, no photos, no signs I had ever lived here. But I was done being a ghost. When I finally laid down, I slipped the envelope under my pillow like it was a secret worth protecting. And it was. Before sunrise, I woke again. The house was still. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my coat, and slid the envelope deeper into my pocket. This wasn't about getting even. This wasn't about revenge. This was about erasing the erasure. About reminding everyone, especially Curtis, that my mother wasn't alone anymore, and that I'd come back for a reason. By morning, the house had returned to its usual performance: quiet conversations behind closed doors, forced smiles at the breakfast table, and everyone pretending like the night before hadn't happened. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee from the half-empty pot Vera had left on the warmer and sat at the kitchen counter, watching her move around like she was running a show no one had asked to attend. Curtis hadn't come downstairs yet. Mom was still in bed, probably nursing her bruises in silence. The plastic stool from dinner still sat near the sink, untouched. I didn't move it. Vera finally looked up. "You staying another night?" she asked, her tone neutral, almost too polite. "I haven't decided," I said, though I had. I wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. She gave a quick nod, like she'd been hoping I'd say that, but wasn't sure how to feel about it. "Well, just let me know. We've got routines here, you know, with the kids and Curtis's schedule and all." Right. Routines. I was the disruption now. She turned to leave, her phone already in hand, thumb tapping the screen. The moment she stepped into the hallway, I heard her voice drop to that low, venom-laced whisper she thought no one could hear, but the house carried sound too well. She signed it. "House is ours now," she said. "All she's got left is guilt." Then a pause before she added with a scoff, "Don't worry about the army brat. She's just passing through." Just passing through. I walked away before I did something I couldn't undo. My palms ached from how tightly I'd been gripping the mug. The day moved slowly. Snow had started falling again, not heavy, but steady enough to blur the edges of the trees lining the street. I watched it from the window in the living room, my mind reeling through everything I'd learned in just a few days. The paperwork, the blood, the missing SIM card, the whispers. This wasn't dysfunction. This was orchestrated abuse. That evening, it happened again. Curtis had been pacing for an hour after dinner. I could hear his boots on the floorboards, back and forth. The air inside the house had gotten stale with anticipation. And then the explosion came. I was upstairs, heading to the linen closet for a blanket, when I heard the first thud. Not loud, just enough to stop me mid-step. I moved toward the stairs, slowly, my footfalls quiet. From the landing, I saw him standing over Mom, who was crumpled near the dining table. Vera stood a few feet away, arms crossed, smirking. The phone in her hand was on speaker again. "I said, stop asking me that, you old witch," Curtis barked. "I'm done repeating myself." Mom whimpered something I couldn't hear. And then, from the speaker, "Go ahead, Curtis. Knock her out of the will, again." Laughter. Actual laughter. On the other end of the line, someone was laughing like this was entertainment. Like my mother begging not to be hit again was comedy. I stood frozen, hand gripping the wooden railing so tightly my knuckles blanched. Curtis didn't see me. Vera didn't look up. I didn't step in. Not yet. Instead, I backed away slowly, breathing through my teeth, and returned to my room. Every cell in my body wanted to scream, to pull him off her, and make him understand what he was doing. But I'd learned long ago in uniform, the best retaliation is the one they don't see coming. That night, after the house settled and the fake apologies had been made, Vera brought Mom a glass of water and muttered something about needing to be more careful. I waited. I waited until their bedroom lights went off, until the kids were snoring down the hall. Then I went to work. Behind the bookshelf in the living room, tucked into the corner near the baseboard, I placed a small digital recorder. It was a backup one I used in the army, just in case. I'd brought it home by accident. Funny how that turned out. I hit record and walked away. The next day, I let things run as usual. I didn't react, didn't intervene, just blended. I helped with dishes, sat through awkward conversations, let Vera smirk, let Curtis breathe easy, let the poison simmer. That night, they spoke freely. They always did when they thought no one was listening. Curtis. Once the paperwork clears, Mom's gone. Yeah, we can finally put this place in my name. Vera. What about Nadina? She's sniffing around. Curtis. Let her sniff. She's not even family anymore. Then silence. And after a beat, Vera's voice, calm and surgical. Blood doesn't matter. Ownership does. The next morning, I retrieved the recorder. My hands didn't shake this time. I took it upstairs and played the file back, sitting on the edge of the guest bed. Every word hit like a hammer. They'd cut her out. Me too. In their minds, this was all theirs now. The house, the history, the control. But the thing about ghosts? We don't stay buried forever. That afternoon, I made a list. Not a hit list. Not even a revenge list. Just a map. A diagram of connections, power plays, names, dates. Who knew what? Who said what? Who stood by and said nothing? It was the beginning of the end. And it wouldn't come with fists or shouting. It would come with truth. Carefully, I returned the recorder to its spot. There would be more to capture, and I wanted them comfortable. Comfort makes people sloppy. They'd already shown me who they really were behind closed doors. Now, I just needed to keep them talking. I waited until Curtis and Vera were both asleep, the way a hunter waits for a predator to lower its guard. The house was still. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional wind rattling a loose pane reminded me I wasn't dreaming. I didn't dream here, not anymore. Mom had finally drifted off, curled on her side, a pillow tucked under her arm like a shield. I stayed beside her until her breathing slowed, then slipped out of the room and into the hallway with steps I'd mastered from a decade of moving through places I wasn't welcome. I needed answers. Not about the fights, not about the bruises. I already knew what kind of man Curtis had become. I needed the history, the old version, the one they hadn't gotten around to rewriting yet. The attic was always a mess of forgotten seasons and misplaced holidays. It still smelled like cedar and mothballs. I pushed open the narrow door at the end of the hall and climbed the wooden steps, each one creaking under my weight. At the top, dust danced in the air like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Vera hadn't touched this place. Too high, too cluttered, too full of things that didn't fit into her vision of a modern family estate. I opened boxes marked with our father's handwriting, Christmas lights tangled around faded garland. A box labeled Nadina, School, made my throat tighten. I didn't open it, not yet. Beneath a pile of worn blankets and a broken lamp, I found it. A small tin box, the kind people use to keep stationery or old recipes in. The edges were rusted. The latch stuck, but it opened after a second try. Inside, a folded letter rested on top of an old photograph, the kind printed from a drugstore kiosk. I blinked at the image. It was me, maybe 5 years old, sitting on Mom's lap in the backyard. She had a daisy tucked behind one ear. My hair was in pigtails. We were laughing at something just outside the frame. Beneath the photo was a single page of paper, yellowed and creased. It wasn't dated. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "You're the only one I trust with silence," it read. I had to sit down on the attic floor. I didn't cry. Not really. But something inside me eased, like a knot that had been tightening since I walked through the front door had finally loosened. Mom had never been the type to say too much. She'd grown up in a generation that stitched grief into the lining of their aprons, but she'd written this. She'd saved this. She'd hidden this. And that meant she'd never really stopped believing I'd come home. Tucked in the envelope was one more note, shorter, barely a sentence. Don't forget whose daughter you are. I tucked both notes into my jacket pocket like they were sacred. When I climbed back down, I didn't go back to bed. I went to the hallway closet, the one next to the den. Vera kept it locked most of the time, which only made it more interesting. But I'd watched her punch in the key code earlier that week. She thought I wasn't paying attention. That was her first mistake. The code worked. The door clicked open. Inside were old DVDs, a Wi-Fi router, a stack of outdated modems, and at the very back, a battered lockbox. A small envelope rested on top, marked in black ink. Surveillance? Copy. My stomach flipped. I took the USB drive inside and slipped it into my laptop in the guest room. It buzzed to life, older than I expected, but still functioning. A single folder opened, Archive 2022 Q3. The files were time-stamped and dated. I clicked through them quickly. Many were corrupted or incomplete, but one clip stood out. Dated November 12th, about 3 weeks ago. I hit play. The footage was grainy, angled from the corner of the dining room ceiling. Curtis stood over Mom. She was trying to get up from her chair, arms bracing on the table. Vera stood in the kitchen archway, arms crossed, saying nothing. Curtis shoved Mom with one hand, hard. She crumpled. The screen didn't shake. The camera didn't blink. It recorded everything. Curtis stepped over her like she was an obstacle. Vera turned away. No one helped. I paused the clip, closed my laptop. This wasn't hearsay. It wasn't interpretation. It wasn't exaggeration. This was proof. That night, I printed 4 stills from the footage. Each one captured a moment. His hand mid-push, her body mid-fall, Vera's face turned away. The timestamp in the bottom corner. I folded the photos into a blank envelope and carried it quietly to Curtis's bedroom. His door was slightly ajar. I could hear him snoring. Vera was murmuring in her sleep. I slipped the envelope beneath his pillow. I didn't write a note. I didn't need to. The next morning, I stayed quiet, ate my toast, drank my coffee, watched the way Curtis fidgeted when he came downstairs. He didn't look at me. He didn't ask anything, but he didn't sit comfortably either. Vera avoided me entirely. By afternoon, I found him standing at the fridge, staring at the open door like he forgot what he came for. I leaned against the counter and said, "You look tired." He didn't respond. I smiled, just barely. Nothing disappears forever, not even you. That night, I lay beside Mom again, listening to her soft breathing, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know what I'd done. Not yet. "It's my house now," I whispered, voice steady. "I just haven't taken the keys back yet." She didn't answer me, not with words at least. Her hand hesitated over the drawer's edge, hovering just above the flash drive labeled Property Truths. It wasn't just curiosity on Vera's face, it was recognition. That flash of knowing, that pause where you realize the script is slipping out of your hands. She slowly pulled the drawer shut. I stayed in the doorway, arms crossed. "What's wrong, Vera?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "You look pale." She blinked, gathered herself, then offered a smile so rehearsed it could have been painted on. "Just tired. Been a long week." "I bet." That was the only exchange we had that morning, but I noticed how her eyes kept flicking toward the drawer during breakfast, how her laughter was a second late during small talk with Curtis, and how, when she thought I wasn't looking, she checked the front door's lock twice. Curtis was quieter than usual, too. He kept rubbing his temple with the heel of his hand, and when I passed him in the hallway, he flinched just slightly. Not much, but enough to tell me the photos under his pillow had been found. Good. The foundation of power, I'd learned, isn't noise, it's silence. And silence, used right, terrifies people like them. By mid-afternoon, I was in my car, headed east down Route 2 to a small town just 20 minutes outside Billings. It was one of those towns with a single diner, a gas station that still sold VHS tapes in a bargain bin, and a courthouse that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. That's where I found Raymond Slate. He was sitting alone at the far booth in the diner, stirring sugar into his coffee like it required surgical precision. He was thinner than I remembered. My father's old friend. He used to come by the house on Sundays to talk politics with Dad and drink whatever beer Mom had hidden in the back fridge. He was a notary back then. Still was. When he saw me walk in, he looked like he'd swallowed something sharp. "Nadina," he said, shifting in his seat. "Mind if I join you?" He gestured to the seat across from him. "I figured this day would come." I took my time. Let him feel the weight of it. "I saw your signature on a transfer," I said, not bothering to soften the words. "My mother's property. The one she doesn't even remember signing." Raymond looked down at his cup. "She signed it. I watched her do it. She bled on the paper, Ray." His hand clenched around the spoon. "She was injured, scared, and vulnerable. And you notarized that." He swallowed, hard. "I knew she wasn't herself. But Curtis, he said if she didn't sign, they'd put her in a home. He said she didn't have money to keep up with bills, and she'd be out on the street. He made it sound like this was her best option." I stared at him. "So you backed it because it was easier?" He didn't deny it. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to answer it truthfully. And I want you to understand that what you say next might be the only decent thing you've done for her in years." He looked at the phone. "Are you recording?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Ask. Did you knowingly notarize a transfer of ownership from my mother while she was cognitively impaired, physically injured, and under pressure from my brother?" Raymond took a long breath, then said, "Yes." I stopped the recording, saved it, put my phone away. "Why now?" he asked. "Why not sooner?" "Because now," I said, "you don't get to be part of the cover-up. You get to be part of the correction." He looked like he was about to cry. I didn't wait for it. I paid for my coffee and left him with the check. Back home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow that hadn't melted in days. The air inside the house felt different, staler, like it knew change was coming. Before heading inside, I made a detour next door to Mrs. Hollins's house. She was my mother's age, had been their neighbor for over 2 decades, and was always the one to bring banana bread after holidays. She answered the door in a cardigan and slippers. "Nadina," she said, eyes widening. "I didn't think—" I held up a hand gently. "I know it's late. I won't stay long." She nodded and stepped aside. In her kitchen, over herbal tea that smelled faintly like mint and cinnamon, I told her what I needed. At first, she hesitated. I saw him pull her by the arm. Once, she fell into the bushes, scraped her elbow, but I didn't want to get in the middle. It's family, you know. And sometimes— "No," I interrupted, softly but firmly. "I don't know. Because there's nothing normal about dragging your mother out of her own home and leaving her bleeding." She looked down at her tea, then up at me. "You're right. I should have said something." "Say it now," I said. "I have a lawyer. I have statements. But an eyewitness, someone who doesn't owe anything to anyone, that means something." She took a deep breath. "Tell me what you need me to do." That night, back in the guest room, I opened my laptop and began organizing everything. Audio files, labeled and time-stamped, video clips, stitched and backed up. Notary confession, check. Eyewitness willing to testify, secured. I opened a new Word document. At the top, I typed, "When they ask why I didn't strike first, I'll say, it wasn't yet time." I leaned back in the chair, let the weight of that sentence settle into me. Timing mattered. Precision mattered. The mistake people like Curtis made wasn't that they acted cruelly. It was that they assumed no one was watching long enough to connect the dots. Downstairs, I heard Vera rustling in the kitchen, drawers opening, papers shifting. I knew exactly which drawer she'd be drawn to. The flash drive I'd labeled Property Truths wasn't just a trick. It was bait. Sure enough, when I walked past the staircase, I caught her standing by the counter, fingers clenched around the drive. Her face was ghost white. "What's wrong, Vera?" I said sweetly, stepping into view. You look pale. Vera didn't say another word after I asked. Her knuckles whitened around the drawer handle, and she turned on her heel, walking stiffly into the dining room. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I'd planted enough doubt, just enough fear. That night, the house moved like something waiting to crack. No arguments, no accusations, but everyone was walking around each other like ghosts, not acknowledging what hovered between the walls. Silence was safer now for them. The next morning, the tension had congealed into something thicker. I could feel it as I stepped into the kitchen. The air was cold, not from the weather, but from the atmosphere. The heat was on, but no one dared break the stillness with casual talk. Curtis sat at the table with his elbows on the wood, his jaw clenched, eyes bloodshot. Vera stood by the coffee maker, her hand hovering over the sugar jar like she'd forgotten how coffee even worked. My mother hadn't come downstairs yet. I didn't blame her. I poured myself a cup of coffee, slowly, like every movement deserved attention. Then I sat across from Curtis and opened my laptop. The room went still. I didn't look up when I spoke. I've sent everything to a lawyer, I said. One who specializes in elder abuse cases. He's already filed for a civil review. Police reports in process. And the hotline? They've logged your names, both of you. Curtis slammed his hand on the table. You're tearing this family apart. I finally looked up. No, Curtis. You did that when you treated Mom like furniture. When you decided I wasn't family anymore. When you used blood and bruises to write your version of history. His face reddened. You don't know what she's like. I know exactly what she's like. She raised me. She covered for you even after you humiliated her in her own living room. She was scared, but she still made excuses for you. That's not weakness. That's love. You just don't know how to receive it without owning it. Vera let her spoon clink too loudly against the mug. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. I thought you might want to see what the lawyer's working with. I laid the folder on the table and opened it. First, the scan of the property transfer. Darlene's signature barely legible, a faint smear of dried blood still visible. Next, printed photos. Her wrist with fading bruises, the dark spot on her temple from the fall, time-stamped video stills of Curtis pushing her in the dining room while Vera stood idly by. Then, the printed transcript. Curtis's words. Once the paperwork clears, Mom's gone. Nadina, she's not even family anymore. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, you hit our mother. You erased me. Now I erase your control. Curtis looked like he wanted to throw something. Instead, he sat frozen, hands fisted on either side of the folder. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Vera looked at him like he was something disgusting stuck to the bottom of her shoe. I'll be forwarding this to the sheriff's office later today, I continued. There's also a copy at my lawyer's firm, off-site, so if anything happens to the original, it doesn't matter. It's already moving. Then I pulled a small flash drive from my coat pocket and placed it on the table in front of him. In case you want to hear yourself confess again. Curtis reached for it but hesitated, fingers just brushing its edges. The silence stretched so long, I thought no one would breathe. Then, finally, he stood up. But not to fight. Not to yell. He just stood there, staring at me, and then looked over at Vera like he expected her to do something, say something to shift the tide. She didn't. She just backed a step toward the fridge, her expression unreadable. Curtis turned like he might leave the room. Then he stopped, shoulders tight, and said low, You don't know what you're doing. I met his gaze evenly. That's the first thing you've said that's true. You don't know what I'm capable of. He didn't reply. Just left the kitchen like a man trying to disappear through drywall. When I looked at Vera, she wasn't sneering anymore. She looked small, like the storm she had danced in had finally hit her skin. I stood, walked out without touching my coffee. Mom was in the hallway, peeking from around the corner. Are you okay? She whispered. I took her hand gently. He won't touch you again. For the first time, her eyes filled, not with fear, but something closer to disbelief, maybe even relief. Later that afternoon, I passed through the living room. The wall that had once been stripped of everything from my childhood now bore something new. A photo of me, Small, maybe 6 or 7, on Dad's shoulders, reaching for a branch of blooming lilacs. It hadn't been there the day before. Underneath it, a note taped gently to the frame. "This house remembers you now." I stood in front of it for a long moment, just breathing. It was never about the picture. It was about being seen, about truth taking its place again. I stood there for a few seconds longer than I meant to, staring at the photo and that little note someone had taped beneath it. I didn't ask who had put it there. Curtis wouldn't have. Vera didn't do sentiment. Maybe it was Mom. Or maybe someone else had decided to tell the truth before I did. Either way, I didn't move until I heard the knock. A low thud at the door. Not urgent, but deliberate. I turned, heart steady, and walked across the room. Through the glass, I saw the sheriff's cruiser parked at the curb, engine still running. The deputy stood just behind the sheriff, both of them bundled against the wind, their faces composed in that specific way people wear when they're about to deliver news or ask questions. I opened the door. "Ms. Rayburn?" the older officer asked. "We'd like to speak with Curtis and Darlene Rayburn regarding a report filed last week." My shoulders didn't even flinch. "Come in," I said. "They're inside." Curtis must have heard the voices, because he came around the corner before they stepped fully inside. He had that false calm about him, the kind people use when they think they can bluff their way out of a consequence. "What's this about?" he asked, arms folded, trying for control. The younger deputy gave a small nod. "Mr. Rayburn, we've received statements, medical reports, and notarized testimony indicating you may have coerced a vulnerable adult into signing legal documents under duress, as well as physically harmed her on multiple occasions." Curtis scoffed, a hollow sound. "You're kidding me. This is because of her?" He jabbed a thumb in my direction. "She's trying to take everything." "This isn't about her," the sheriff replied. "This is about your mother. We're here to ask questions, but I suggest you take this seriously." Curtis's jaw worked for a second. Then he laughed. "This is Nadina's revenge. You don't know her. She's always been like this, bitter, jealous, angry." Vera appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. "Curtis," she started, but he ignored her. "She's destroying everything we've built," he continued. "All this, the house. We made this place livable again." The sheriff didn't move. "Sir, we need you to come with us for questioning. You're not under arrest at this time, but if you refuse, we will have to escalate." Curtis tried to speak again, but something must have clicked. Maybe it was the badge, or maybe it was the realization that the story he'd built was finally collapsing. He stepped forward stiffly. "I'll get my coat," he muttered, then glanced at me. "You think you've won, don't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. As he passed by me, Mom stepped out from behind the hallway corner, holding something small in her hands. Her eyes met mine before she moved forward. She held out her palm. In it, a keychain. Old, worn. A little rust along the loop. Attached was a simple tag, plastic, cracked with age, and inside it, a small strip of paper with my name written in her handwriting. "Nadina." "I kept these," she said softly. "Even when he changed the locks. I kept them. I just didn't know when to give them back." I took the keys from her slowly, gently curling my fingers around them. "I'm home now," I said. The deputies led Curtis out the front door. Vera didn't follow. She stayed frozen halfway down the stairs, her face unreadable. We didn't say goodbye. Later that day, after the cruiser pulled away and the house quieted again, I helped Mom gather her things. Not much. Just a couple suitcases, a few framed photos, a box of old letters, and a blanket she swore she couldn't sleep without. We didn't pack anything that felt like it belonged to Curtis or Vera. This time, we were leaving with only what was ours. When I walked through the house, I noticed how empty it suddenly looked. Not physically, furniture still stood, curtains still hung, but emotionally, it no longer felt like a home someone was fighting for. It felt like a house that had decided who it wanted to belong to. At the base of the stairs, Vera stood motionless as we carried the final bag toward the door. I looked at her. She looked back. "You don't own stories, Vera," I said. "You just rearranged the furniture." She didn't respond. The wind outside had picked up, stirring the last of the snow into small spirals across the driveway. The sky was heavy with late winter gray. We stepped out into it, just Mom and me. The rental car was small, but it held everything we needed. I opened the passenger door for her, then slid behind the wheel. Mom buckled her seatbelt without a word, looking out the window at the house behind us. After a long moment, she asked, "Where to now?" I started the engine and watched the dashboard flicker to life. "Someplace quiet," I said. "But first, we plant new roots." We didn't drive far. Just 15 minutes outside the edge of Billings, down a 2-lane road that ran past frozen pastures and wooden mailboxes leaning with age, there sat a modest bungalow with white siding and a crooked porch. The kind of place that didn't pretend to be more than it was. The kind of place that knew how to breathe. I'd signed the lease 3 days earlier under both our names. My mother didn't know that part yet. She sat in the passenger seat, her fingers curling around the seatbelt as she stared out the window. When I turned into the gravel driveway, she looked over. "This is it?" she asked softly. I nodded. "It's small, but it's safe." She didn't respond right away, but I saw her exhale. Not relief, not joy, just the kind of breath someone releases when they've stopped holding everything in for too long. We unpacked slowly. There wasn't much. A few bags, a tin box, a framed photo, a blanket that still smelled like her old closet. We didn't talk much while we moved things inside. We didn't need to. The living room smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust. The floor creaked in 3 different places. The walls had small nail holes from pictures long gone, but the light came through the windows just right in the afternoon. And for the first time in a long while, the silence felt clean, not oppressive. By evening, we'd settled into a rhythm. Mom made tea in the chipped kettle she insisted on bringing. I rearranged the bookshelf in the corner, tucking in 2 paperbacks and 1 framed picture of us from my Army graduation. It was the only picture we had taken together in nearly a decade. She looked proud in it. I didn't realize until then how rare that look had become. After dinner, leftover soup we'd picked up from the diner on the drive, she handed me a small envelope. "I meant to give this to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took it, recognizing the tin box from the attic. I hadn't opened it since we left the house. I'd told myself I'd wait until we were somewhere safe, somewhere that felt like ours. I unfolded the letter slowly, expecting to find something familiar. But it wasn't old. The paper was clean. The ink was fresh. "I wrote this last night," she said, watching my face. I read it in silence. "You were the only one who saw me as more than a bank account, the only one who didn't make me feel old, just real. I know I should have protected you, but I couldn't even protect myself. You gave me something I didn't know I could still have, a beginning." I folded the letter and slid it into the side pocket of my duffel bag. "I didn't need it," I told her, "but I'll keep it forever." She smiled, just a little, then reached for her tea. That night, I stood on the porch alone, wrapped in a sweater I'd found in the hallway closet. The stars were faint above the trees, the wind slow and quiet. Everything inside me still hummed with the residue of battle, but I could feel it fading, slowly. Mom went to bed early. I stayed up late. I kept thinking about that old house, about everything we left behind, and everything we took with us. The house was never the problem. It was the silence. The way it grew in corners, beneath rugs, behind picture frames. The way it convinced us we were alone even when we weren't. Now we weren't pretending anymore. We weren't erasing anything. We weren't rewriting our past. We were choosing what to carry and what to leave behind. I looked at the porch steps and imagined a row of potted herbs next spring. Maybe a wind chime. Maybe a bench. We weren't what we used to be. We may never be. But we could be something new, something real. Inside, I heard the soft creak of Mom's bedroom door, then her footsteps down the hall. She appeared in the doorway with a puzzled look. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just thinking," she nodded. "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." She hesitated, then walked over and stood next to me on the porch. We didn't say anything for a while. Finally, she asked, Do you think they'll leave us alone? I looked out into the dark and thought of Curtis's face when the cruiser pulled away. Thought of Vera's silence on the stairs. Thought of everything that had been said behind closed doors. I think they've already lost, I said, even if they don't know it yet. Mom nodded. Then, with a kind of quiet bravery that felt new, she reached for my hand. It was the first time she had done that since I was a teenager. And maybe that, more than anything, was the start of something worth rebuilding. Later, after she returned to bed, I opened my laptop and began writing something I hadn't tried in years. Not a report, not a statement, just words, for myself. If someone tells you family is everything, ask them whose version they mean. And if they laugh while hurting you, walk away. The quiet ones carry more power than you think. I hit save, closed the screen, and whispered into the stillness of the room. No next chapter. Just a better life. But if you ever hear silence where love should be, listen harder. Sometimes the worst battles aren't fought overseas, they're fought inside the walls we once called home. This story wasn't just about justice, it was about reclaiming a voice that others tried to silence, about standing up, not with fists, but with truth. Have you ever had to fight for someone who couldn't fight for themselves? Or reclaim a space where you were made to feel invisible? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might help someone else find theirs. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories that remind us, family isn't about blood, it's about who stands beside you when it matters most. Hello, my name's Rilya. I worked 2 jobs to put my sister through med school, paid her rent, her tuition, even skipped meals so she wouldn't have to. She passed, she became a doctor, then she changed her last name and told the world I didn't exist. No thank you, no mention, not even a seat at her graduation. She built her future on my sacrifices, then erased every trace of me. And when I finally spoke up, she told people I was unstable, jealous, a liar. But I kept every receipt. They told me I should be proud of her. But tell me, how do you celebrate someone who stepped on you to reach the stage? Would you stay silent? If the world only applauded the person who buried you? The first thing I noticed was how clean everything looked. The kind of clean that doesn't come from mopping, but from money. The campus lawn had been trimmed down to the millimeter, the hedges shaped into perfect curves. It was early, just after 8 a.m., but there were already people gathering inside the event center. Men in tailored suits, women in expensive dresses that whispered rather than rustled. I sat there in my old Honda, parked just far enough from the entrance to not be seen, but close enough to see through the glass wall. And there she was, Vera, standing under the spotlights in her white coat, flanked by her new world. She smiled like she belonged there. Maybe she did. I didn't move. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, not because I was cold, but because if I let go, I didn't trust what I might do next. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just hollow. 10 years ago, I gave up my spot at community college so Vera could stay in school. She was struggling with tuition, books, and barely holding it together emotionally. I stepped in without her asking. I picked up early morning shifts at the dental clinic where I sterilized tools and answered phones. Then at night, I flipped burgers and mopped sticky diner floors while drunk college kids laughed too loud. Back then, people kept telling me, she's got potential. She just needs support. And I was the support. I never argued. I didn't need applause. I needed her to make it. Vera was always the golden one, sharp, charming, always knew what to say. I was the quiet one, the steady one. While she networked, I worked. While she took practice exams, I took on a 3rd shift during holiday breaks. She used to say thank you. Small things, coffee left on the counter in the morning, a sticky note that said, "You rock." We had a rhythm. We shared late-night ramen on the floor of our apartment and talked about the future. But then things shifted. Gradually, I noticed the coffee stopped showing up. The sticky notes disappeared. Our conversations turned into brief nods and one-word texts. She started studying more with people I never met. Then she moved out to Focus. I still paid her portion of the electric bill that month. And now, Here I was, sitting in a car that needed new brakes, wearing a coat from Goodwill, watching the woman I sacrificed everything for walk across a stage without a single glance back. She didn't even save me a seat. I hadn't received a formal invitation. My friend at the dental clinic forwarded it to me after she saw Vera listed as a keynote recipient in the alumni newsletter. The invite said, "Reserved seating for key donors and guests." I guess the $38,720 I poured into her education over the years didn't make me a donor. Just a footnote. She was radiant under the lights, confident, powerful. The applause felt like static in my ears. I could see her through the glass, clear, untouchable. She hugged the dean, posed for photos. Her name echoed in the hallway like a bell. And me? I was still on the outside, literally and metaphorically. I wasn't angry, not really. But I started doing math in my head, the kind of math people like me do when rent is 2 days late and groceries are getting low. I counted back through the years, how many overtime hours I took on, how many student loan payments I made under her name because she couldn't qualify. I remembered using my emergency savings to cover her textbooks while I skipped a dentist appointment because I couldn't afford both. I funded her dream, and somewhere along the way, I'd erased my own. The funny thing is, I don't think she meant to cut me out entirely, not at first, but Vera was always good at shedding skin when she needed to fit a new mold. And when the medical world demanded prestige, there was no room for the sister who worked night shifts and wore Payless shoes. I stared through the glass like I was watching a movie, one I had financed, cast, and directed, only to be left off the credits. A group of young med students walked past my car, laughing, their coats flapping in the wind. One of them looked over, caught my eye for a second, and looked away like I was a stranger, or maybe someone lost. I was both. I glanced at the time, almost noon. I had to be at work by 1:30. I couldn't afford to be late. My supervisor had warned me last week after I missed a shift covering for someone else. But still, I didn't drive off. I kept watching until the crowd inside began to thin. The lights dimmed. Vera stood at the edge of the platform, posing for one last photo. Her smile was wide, practiced. And that's when it hit me. She didn't forget me. She erased me. There's a difference. Forgetting implies something accidental, a moment of absent-mindedness. But erasing, that takes intent. That takes decision. I finally put the car in gear and pulled away. At the stoplight, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, hair tied back in a loose bun, jaw clenched. "She didn't forget me," I said aloud, barely recognizing my own voice. "She erased me." And that sentence, it did something. It cracked open something in me that had been sealed for years. The part that thought loyalty guaranteed love. The part that believed sacrifice would be remembered. As the light turned green, I didn't feel better. But I felt awake. By the time I got home, the traffic had thickened, and the afternoon sun had already begun slipping behind the trees. I turned off the ignition and just sat there in the car, watching the neighbors' wind chimes dance in the breeze. That sentence from earlier was still bouncing around inside me, echoing off the walls of my skull like it had been waiting 10 years to be spoken. She didn't forget me. She erased me. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt like remembering a truth I had once known, then buried because it hurt too much to hold, like realizing a childhood memory was actually a lie. I carried it inside as I walked through the front door of my apartment, flicked on the kitchen light, and dropped my purse onto the chipped Formica counter. The place smelled faintly of burnt coffee and lemon cleaning spray. I didn't bother changing clothes, just kicked off my shoes, microwaved a leftover burrito, and sat down with a cup of stale coffee. I was chewing on autopilot, thinking about nothing in particular, when I noticed the small white envelope tucked between an old water bill and a coupon flyer on the table. No return address, but the handwriting, slanted, confident, familiar, was Vera's. Inside was a thank you card, one of those pre-printed types with gold foil letters that said, "To those who helped me shine." On the inside, in Vera's handwriting, it read, "Jane, thank you for believing in me when no one else did." Jane. I stared at that name like it was a punch to the face. Who the hell was Jane? Not me. That was for sure. I must have read it 3 times before I laughed. A short, breathless, almost wheezing laugh. Not because it was funny, because my body didn't know what else to do. Jane? I looked around my tiny living room as if someone else might be there to witness this, as if someone could verify that I was not, in fact, losing my grip on reality. There was no Jane in our lives, never had been. No mentor named Jane, no landlord named Jane. I was the one who lent Vera money when her check bounced. I was the one who signed as her emergency contact for 6 years. I was the one who sat in the ER with her when she had a panic attack before her first board exam. But Vera had written a thank you note to Jane. I slid the card back into the envelope, placed it on the counter, and stared at it like it was some kind of weapon. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just sat there, frozen in a moment I didn't want but couldn't avoid. Later that evening, I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Vera's contact. I don't even know what I was planning to say. Maybe I wasn't planning to say anything at all. I just needed to hear her voice. Or maybe I wanted to catch her in a lie, hear her hesitate and scramble when I said, "Who's Jane?" But I never made the call. I hung up before the first ring. Instead, I sent a text. One word. Congrats. She didn't reply. An hour later, I was scrolling through Facebook while waiting for my laundry cycle to finish. And there it was. A new post on Vera's feed. A photo of her standing next to her framed diploma, holding a glass of champagne. The caption read, "To those who supported me through this journey, you know who you are." That one. That felt like a scalpel. I locked my phone and placed it screen down on the coffee table. Sat there for a long time, letting the silence fill every corner of the room. I didn't need her to tag me. I didn't need a parade. But I wasn't invisible. I was there. I was the unpaid chauffeur, the overnight therapist, the temp nurse, the bank. I was the reason she even had a journey. And she knew it. She just didn't want anyone else to. Later that week, a local article started circulating online. One of those feel-good pieces about perseverance. A friend from work forwarded it to me with a smiley face and a "Is this your sister?" in the subject line. The headline read, "From Struggle to Success, Dr. Vera Calderon's Journey to Medicine." I skimmed the first few paragraphs numb until my eyes hit a quote that made me stop breathing. As the first in my family to attend college, I knew I had to be my own fuel. There were no safety nets, no shortcuts, just grit. I reread that quote, twice, 3 times. First in disbelief, then in fury, then in something colder than both. First in her family. She hadn't just left me out, she'd rewritten me out, deleted me like a typo. I dropped the phone onto the couch and stood up too fast. My legs felt weak, my stomach sick. I paced, counted the steps between the wall and the window. 8, back and forth, 8 again. Then I sat down and opened my laptop. Wrote an email. Just a simple one. Subject: Wow. Message: First in the family, huh? Then I deleted it. I opened my phone's voice recorder, hit record. I spoke for 23 minutes straight. About the time I bought her first lab coat. About the time I watched her walk into her MCAT exam with my backpack on her shoulder because hers had torn. About the nights I stayed up with her when she had panic attacks, and I hummed the lullaby our grandmother used to sing when we were little. When I finished, I sat in silence. Then I hit delete. Not because I forgave her, but because I knew now. It wasn't about her forgetting. It was about her pretending I never existed. This wasn't memory loss. It was narrative control. I was the messy part of her story, the chapter that didn't fit the brand. The truth was inconvenient, unmarketable. So she cut it out. And that night, in my own kitchen, with the sound of my washer spinning in the background and the street lamp flickering outside, I picked up my favorite mug, the one Vera gave me 6 years ago, the one that said "World's Best Sister," and I threw it against the floor. It shattered instantly. I didn't flinch. I looked at the mess for a long time. Part of me expected to cry, but I didn't. Instead, I took the broom from the closet and swept up the pieces slowly, one by one. There was something strangely satisfying about it. The control of it, the finality. I wasn't broken. I was clearing space. I didn't lose her. I lost the illusion of her, and that illusion had cost me 10 years, and now it was demanding silence too. I don't remember falling asleep that night. One minute I was sitting on the edge of my couch, surrounded by the silence I'd gotten used to, and the next, sunlight was bleeding through the blinds like it was trying to remind me that life goes on, whether or not you're ready. I moved through the kitchen slowly, muscle memory guiding me as I filled the kettle, opened the fridge, closed it again without taking anything out. That phrase from the night before still hung in the air like smoke I couldn't clear. I didn't lose her. I lost the illusion of her. It stayed with me as I sifted through a stack of mail I'd been ignoring. Most of it was junk, local ads, a bill I'd already paid. But one piece made me pause. A flyer, glossy and polished, from a private medical group in South Carolina. A recruitment pitch, it looked like. I was about to toss it when my eye caught the name printed dead center in bold serif letters. Dr. Vera Calderone, MD. I stared at it for a beat too long. She hadn't just changed cities. She'd changed her entire skin. I flipped the page over. There was her picture, chin tilted confidently upward, white coat perfectly pressed, eyes bright with ambition. Her bio said she was a trailblazer from humble beginnings, committed to breaking generational cycles. Humble beginnings. Was that code for me? I read it again. Nowhere did it mention our hometown. No reference to the college I sacrificed for her to attend. Not even a mention of being the first doctor in a working-class family. It was like she had been planted in her career, fully grown from the dirt of her own myth. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my laptop. My fingers moved fast, like they were chasing something they already knew existed. I typed her name into a search bar and hit enter. Page after page came up. Interviews, academic journal articles, mentions in medical newsletters. Her name was everywhere. Vera Calderone, never Vera Santiago, no maiden name in parentheses, no hyphen. No history. I opened one article after another. I scanned for any sign of connection, a quote about her background, even a vague reference to a sister who believed in her. There was nothing. It wasn't just that she'd rewritten her story, she'd redacted me from the margins. I caught myself refreshing the page like maybe a new detail would appear, something I missed. But the facts remained the same. I wasn't just forgotten. I was scrubbed out, like an inconvenient statistic. And somehow that was worse than the thank you card to Jane. That was worse than the Facebook post. This was clinical, cold, a calculated erasure. I leaned back in the chair, numb. Suddenly, a memory hit me. Not loud or dramatic, but subtle, like a breeze brushing against a scar you'd forgotten was there. I was 15. Our parents were in the middle of what felt like their 50th argument that month. Divorce was hanging in the air, thick and inevitable. I remember hiding in the hallway while Vera sat on her bed, writing in her journal. Back then, she used to let me read it. Only the parts she didn't lock with the tiny brass key. That day, the page was open. I crept in quietly after she left for school. It was a single sentence, circled twice. I'll never give up the Santiago name. It's the only part of me that's real. I had believed her. I'd clung to that sentence like it was a promise, like it meant that no matter where we went or what we became, we'd always be tied together by something no one could take away. Now, that promise was just another scrap of fiction she left behind. The tears didn't come. Not immediately. It was more like a weight settling into my chest, not sharp enough to scream, but heavy enough to leave a mark. I closed the laptop and walked over to the bookshelf, pulling out an old photo album from our childhood. The leather was cracked, the corners curling. I flipped through the pages, birthdays, holidays, blurry school plays. She was in every picture. So was I. The final page held a snapshot of us in front of our grandmother's house, arms linked, wearing matching hand-me-down jackets and crooked smiles. We were maybe 8 and 11. I could still hear the sound of our laughter, shrill and genuine, rising over the clatter of pots and the scent of burnt rice. I placed the album down and got in my car. The drive to our mother's house was quiet. No music, just the rhythm of tires on asphalt and the occasional blink of a turn signal. By the time I pulled into the driveway, The sun had started its descent, casting a golden hue over the porch steps. She was outside, as always, sipping iced tea and chatting with the neighbor across the fence. I stayed in the car for a moment, watching. "My daughter's a doctor now," she said with pride, not realizing I could hear her from the street. "She made it all on her own." My stomach clenched. The neighbor gasped, impressed. "That's incredible. You must be so proud." "Oh, I am," my mother replied. "She's always been ambitious, never needed anyone to hold her hand." I opened the door slowly, careful not to slam it. She turned when she heard the creak. Her smile faltered but returned quickly, though less certain this time. "Hey, sweetheart," she said casually. "Didn't expect you today." "I was in the neighborhood," I lied. The neighbor waved awkwardly and excused herself. My mother stood, dusting off her slacks like I was someone who needed polite presentation. We went inside. The living room hadn't changed in years. Same beige carpet, same doily-covered armchairs. The faint scent of lavender and old wood lingered. I sat down, not quite settling in. "Nice to see you," she said, making her way to the kitchen. "Want some tea?" "Sure." She poured 2 glasses. We sat in silence for a while, sipping. Finally, I broke it. "I heard what you said outside." She blinked, then looked down at her glass. "What did I say?" "That Vera made it all on her own, that she never needed anyone." She didn't respond. "Was I not here for 10 years?" I asked. "Did I imagine covering her rent, or helping her through panic attacks, or—" "I didn't mean it like that," she cut in. "You've always been the quiet one. Vera's just out there, you know? Out there, like ambition made erasure acceptable, like volume mattered more than truth." "I guess I just thought you'd remember," I said. She didn't meet my eyes. Later, when I got home, I sat at my desk and pulled out my ID. Santiago, my last name, our last name. I stared at it and felt disconnected, like it belonged to someone else now, like I was carrying around a name nobody claimed anymore. I walked to the closet, reached up to the top shelf, and pulled down an old box labeled Keepsakes. Inside was our childhood scrapbook, stickers on the cover, doodles on the edges, pages filled with construction paper, photos, Scotch tape. I opened to the middle and stared at a page titled Sisters Forever. I didn't hesitate. I walked to the sink, lit a match, and burned it, not out of hate, but because grief sometimes looks like letting go of something beautiful that never really existed the way you remembered. I watched the flame eat away the edges, curling them inward like a leaf in autumn. Ash floated into the air, soft and final. She was never written into my story, but she was etched into mine, and when I saw her face again, I wasn't even sure she'd say my name. When I saw her again, it was by accident, or at least it started that way. I'd picked up an extra catering shift through a friend. She said the tips would be good, and I needed the cash. The envelope showed up 2 days later. Black ink on thick, cream-colored stock, the kind of paper that whispers money before you even read a word. I opened it without thinking, just expecting instructions and a floor plan. Instead, my eyes locked onto the bolded headline, Blake Hart Rising Women in Medicine, Gala honoring Dr. Vera Calderon. I stood there at the kitchen counter, the paper trembling in my hands. I reread the line, even traced the letters with my thumb, as if maybe I'd hallucinated it. No, it was her, Vera. Being honored, again. And I was going to be there, serving drinks. I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworker who handed me the job. Not the agency rep who confirmed my availability. I packed my uniform in silence, pressed the collar, polished my shoes, and braided my hair tight. I didn't want to go, but some part of me needed to, like watching a train wreck you already know the ending to, but you can't tear your eyes away. By the time I arrived, the event space was already humming. Chandeliers cast golden light over linen-covered tables. A jazz quartet played in the corner. The scent of roasted lamb and truffle oil drifted in waves through the ballroom. I checked in with the event manager, who barely looked up before waving me toward the kitchen. I slid into my blazer, adjusted the tray straps on my arm, and walked out into the crowd like I was invisible. Maybe I was. The room was filled with people who spoke in lowered tones and smiled like they were trying to sell something, even when they weren't. I moved quietly, offering champagne flutes and sparkling water, nodding politely, keeping my eyes down. Then I saw her. She was standing near the stage, in a deep blue dress that hugged her figure just right. Her hair was swept into a bun so precise it looked sculpted. She laughed, loud, confident, and touched the elbow of a silver-haired man in a navy suit. He leaned in as she gestured toward the large projection screen behind them. I took one step backward before I caught myself. My fingers tightened around the tray. No one noticed me, not even her. Especially not her. Then the slideshow began. The screen flickered, displaying a carefully curated series of images. Vera in her white coat, Vera volunteering at a clinic, Vera speaking to a classroom of high school girls. There was no sign of me, not in the background, not in the captions, not even in the early photos. One image made me pause. Our old living room couch. I recognized the pillow I'd sewn myself. But only one person was in the frame. Vera. She'd cropped me out. My stomach dropped, but I kept moving. Champagne to the left. Appetizers to the right. Smile when spoken to. Pretend this doesn't feel like watching someone steal your house and redecorate it like you were never there. I circled the room once, then twice. By the third lap, my eyes couldn't stop drifting back to her. At one point, she glanced my way. I thought maybe there'd be a flicker of recognition, even just a twitch of the mouth. But instead, she leaned toward the nurse standing beside her and whispered something. Seconds later, a security guard approached me. Quiet, firm. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." I blinked. "I'm working." His expression didn't shift. "You've been identified as a guest who wasn't properly registered. We just need to verify a few things." I glanced at Vera. She was looking straight through me. "Please," the guard said again. His tone wasn't unkind, but it wasn't optional either. The room had quieted just enough for people to turn, just enough for someone to whisper, "She must have snuck in." And just like that, I was escorted out. No shouting, no resistance, just shame wrapped in silence. Back in the kitchen, I removed my apron with shaking fingers and handed it off to a confused line cook. I didn't explain, I didn't need to. I drove home in the dark, headlights streaking the highway like ghosts passing me by. 3 days later, I went to my mother's house. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day she usually spent rearranging knickknacks and pretending everything was fine. I hadn't been there in a while. Not since the last phone call ended in her saying, "Well, you know how Vera gets." The door was unlocked, as always. I stepped inside quietly, the scent of potpourri and pine sol greeting me like a reminder of childhood. "Mom?" I called out. She appeared from the hallway, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Oh, you didn't call." "Thought I'd surprise you." She smiled, a little too tightly. "Well, I'm glad you're here." We made small talk for a while. She offered me lemonade, which I declined. Then I saw it. The photo wall. It used to be filled with family moments, me and Vera at the lake, Christmases, birthdays. But now, a new frame took center place, a large one, professionally printed. It was Vera. Standing beside her boyfriend, their golden retriever at her feet, arms around our mother. My spot was gone, literally. I had been in that photo, once. It had been taken at the same BBQ. I remembered laughing too hard to stand straight. They'd cropped me out. I walked closer, stared at the glossy frame, and said nothing. My mother came up beside me. "Oh, that? Well, you didn't come to the last few get-togethers. I didn't want to assume you wanted to be in it." I turned to look at her. "You didn't want to assume I was still your daughter?" She blinked, fumbled for something to say, then settled on, "It's just a picture, Rilia." No, it wasn't. And we both knew it. I left before the lemonade sweated through the glass. I didn't slam the door, didn't raise my voice, but something inside me shifted on the drive back. A quiet rearranging. I didn't feel hollow anymore. I felt focused. Let them crop me out. Let them erase the captions, delete the old files, rewrite the scripts. They thought silence meant surrender. But I wasn't done. If I was going to be invisible, then I'd make damn sure I became unforgettable. The next time she saw me, I wasn't holding a tray. I was holding proof. I didn't wait long after the gala. That kind of humiliation doesn't just sit still inside you. It moves. It mutates. It pushes you toward action, even if you're not entirely sure where that action will lead. The next morning, I was ironing my only decent button-down, folding the sleeves with a precision I hadn't applied to anything in years. Not since I used to steam Vera's interview clothes while she crammed for her organic chem exams. Now, I wasn't preparing her for anything. I was preparing myself. I got to the hospital just before visiting hours began. The parking garage was already full, so I had to circle twice before I found a spot wedged between two oversized SUVs. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. No lipstick, no earrings, just clean and presentable. My badge from the catering shift was still in my purse. I almost laughed. I used to think showing up in a uniform meant I had nothing to prove. Now I knew better. The front desk nurse gave me a polite nod as I approached. "Hi," I said, calmly. "I'm here to leave a message for Dr. Vera Calderon." She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. "Name?" "Rilia Santiago." There was a pause. "I'll let her know." I stepped aside and waited, standing near a display about heart health that hadn't been updated since Valentine's Day. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. I was about to leave when I saw her. Vera came around the corner, clipboard in hand, her posture perfect. She looked surprised to see me, not alarmed, just momentarily caught off guard. Then her expression reset into that same tight-lipped smile she wore at the gala. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice even, cold. I didn't blink. "I paid for you to be here. I think that earns me a hallway." She glanced at the nurse's station. One of them was watching, curious. The air changed. "I'm working," she said, a little sharper now. "This isn't the time or place." I stepped closer, but kept my voice low. "You keep saying that. Isn't it funny how the right time never seems to come?" Vera exhaled sharply through her nose and motioned to a nearby nurse. "She needs to be escorted." Before the nurse could take a step, I raised my voice, not shouting, just clear enough to carry, "One day, you'll have to say my name again, and when you do, I'll have receipts." That stopped her. The nurse hesitated. A few patients glanced up from their chairs in the waiting area. Vera's lips parted like she was about to respond, but she didn't. She just turned on her heel and walked away. I left without being forced. By the time I got home, I was still shaking, but not from fear, from clarity. It was the kind of clarity that burns like antiseptic. It stings before it heals. I was halfway through making a pot of coffee when my phone buzzed. Unknown sender. The email subject read, "You don't know me, but you should." I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then I opened it. "Hi, Rilia. You don't know me well. I'm Jovi, Vera's old roommate. We met once, years ago. I doubt you remember. I've stayed quiet for a long time. Probably too long. But after what happened at the gala, I can't anymore. You deserve to know that you're not crazy. She's been erasing you deliberately. Attached are some screenshots. Read them when you're ready. No signature. Just the email address and a single attachment labeled Truth Zip. I downloaded it and braced myself. Inside were 4 screenshots of text messages between Vera and Jovi. They weren't dated, but the context was clear. Vera referred to me as the mule, as in, she's useful, carries everything, doesn't complain, like a damn mule. Another message, she's not even ambitious, doesn't get it. But hey, at least she's reliable. Reliable. That word echoed in my head like a bullet in an empty hallway. I sat down, staring at the screen, jaw clenched. I wasn't even angry yet, just stunned, numb. I think some part of me had always known, but seeing it, typed out in plain English, like I was a tool instead of a person, that was something else entirely. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten. I recognized the penmanship immediately, rounded letters, slightly slanted right. Jovi. Rilia, I was there when she cried to you over grades. I was there when you brought her food during finals. I was there when she deleted you from the slideshow because she said, "It's cleaner without her in it." I didn't speak up then. I should have. I'm speaking now. You were never the problem. She just needed a version of success that didn't include anyone who reminded her where she came from. I read it once, then again, then a third time. This wasn't a letter. It was a permission slip, a release, a validation that I wasn't imagining it all. It was the first time in years someone told me I mattered, and meant it. That night, I pulled out a cardboard box from the back of my closet. Inside was a decade's worth of evidence: receipts, rent agreements, tuition stubs, bank transfers. I found old sticky notes from Vera, the ones she used to leave me before tests. "Thanks for covering dinner. Again. Love you. Don't forget to pay the water bill. Couldn't do this without you." I laid them out on the table like puzzle pieces. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like building a record. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to document everything. Every hour I worked so she could study. Every late fee I covered. Every promise I held for her until she could hold her own. I spent the weekend printing copies, highlighting dates, cross-referencing transactions, organizing every folder by year, by category, by consequence. It wasn't rage that kept me up late. It was resolve. On Monday morning, I walked to the post office and slipped a padded envelope into the outgoing slot. It was addressed to Vera's apartment. Inside were copies of the files. On top, a single note in my handwriting: "You still have time to tell the truth." After that, I walked back to my car slowly, the sun warm on my face. It didn't feel like closure, not yet, but it felt like the beginning of something bigger than silence. Some people don't see mercy as a gift. They see it as a weakness. Mercy is a beautiful thing, until it's placed in the hands of someone who sees it as a weakness. A week had passed since I mailed Vera the folder. Receipts, leases, bank transfers, her own handwriting, thanking me. The evidence wasn't threatening, it was factual. My final olive branch, really. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't ask for anything. Just gave her a window to come clean on her own terms, privately. She didn't take it. Instead, she doubled down. I first saw it on LinkedIn. A post Vera had written the same day my package was likely delivered. No one handed me anything. I built this life from the ground up. It had already gotten hundreds of likes and a string of comments. Inspirational. Self-made queen. You're the example our daughters need. Each one felt like sandpaper on a wound. I closed the browser without reacting. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I was done letting her see me bleed. 2 days later, I got a message from Jovi. "Hey, I submitted your name as my guest for the Women of Excellence Gala next week. Vera's being honored again. Thought you should be in the room. This time, not in a uniform." I didn't respond right away. It wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. Timing matters. If I'd shown up too soon, it would have looked desperate. Too late, and she'd spin her version of events uncontested. But this was just right. The night of the gala, I wore a black dress I'd found at a resale shop downtown. Simple, sleek, not a single brand name in sight. My hair was pulled back, lips bare, folder tucked under one arm like it belonged there. The event was held in a high-rise ballroom, floor-to-ceiling windows, chandeliers that probably cost more than my yearly income. I arrived just as guests were being seated. Jovi met me at the entrance, gave my hand a light squeeze. "You okay?" "I will be," she nodded. "I told the host you're with me. He won't stop you if it gets to that." I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. Inside, the space was buzzing, waiters in white gloves, string quartet playing something too elegant to recognize. Vera stood near the podium, smiling for a photographer, shaking hands like she'd been born into that world. When her eyes met mine, there was the briefest flash of recognition, followed immediately by composure. She turned back to her conversation without pause. I took my seat. Jovi sat beside me. The lights dimmed. A voice announced the keynote. Dr. Vera Calderone, recipient of this year's Rising Legacy Award for Excellence in Public Health and Community Empowerment. She stepped up to the mic like she'd been waiting her whole life for that moment. There were days I didn't think I'd make it, she began, but I built myself from scratch. No shortcuts, no handouts, just determination, hard work, and vision. The applause was immediate. Cameras flashed, smiles widened. Even the event host was nodding, clearly impressed. But I stood, calmly, slowly, without theatrics. I walked forward. The host took a step toward me, but Jovi leaned in and said something low in his ear. Whatever it was made him stop cold. I climbed the 2 stairs to the stage, not facing Vera, facing the audience. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I just wanted to return something that was left behind." I opened the folder. One by one, I removed the documents, tuition checks in my name, lease agreements from the apartment she lived in during school, the letter from her dean thanking me for supporting her financially during her final semester. And then, the last page, a yellow post-it note, in her handwriting. "Thanks for believing in me. I couldn't do this without you. V." I held it up for the cameras. The silence was instant. You could hear the string quartet stop tuning. You could hear forks touch plates. And then, a voice from the back, soft, confused. "She's her sister?" I didn't need to respond. Vera hadn't moved. Her hands were still on the podium, gripping the sides like she might fall over. I turned to her, not with anger, not even with pity, just with truth. "This was never about applause," I said. "It was about truth." Then I stepped down, folder still in hand. No one tried to stop me. No one dared. The cameras turned, not toward Vera, toward me. I didn't look back. Outside, the night air was cool, quiet. I stood near the valet stand, waiting for the car Jovi had arranged. My hands were steady, my breathing even. She'd spent years building a story without me in it, and I had just reminded the world that it wasn't hers to write alone. But the story didn't end with silence. The storm began with a DM. I was halfway through reheating leftovers the next day when the message came in. No subject line, just a preview that read, "You don't know me, but..." I almost deleted it. I'd had enough unsolicited feedback from strangers since the gala. But something about the sender name, Drew M., felt oddly familiar. I opened it. "Hi, Rilia. We haven't met, but I intern at Blakehart. I thought you should know. Vera's telling people you faked everything. Said you're jealous, that you've been unstable for years. She's showing them screenshots of your messages. I don't know you, but I saw your folder at the event. I don't believe her. Just thought you deserved to know." Drew attached was a photo of a conversation, one Vera had apparently forwarded. It looked edited, obviously so. Text bubbles misaligned, timestamps weird. She'd told the firm I was blackmailing her, that I was bitter she'd outgrown me. Bitterness? If this was bitterness, it was because I had poured the best years of my life into holding her up, and she'd repaid me by standing on my neck. I closed the fridge and sat down at the kitchen table, trying to steady my breath. She wasn't just trying to ignore me now, she was actively discrediting me. And that was her final mistake. I didn't scream, didn't post a rebuttal. I opened my laptop, pulled up a folder I hadn't touched since her 3rd year of med school. Inside it was the original draft of a paper she'd submitted for a legal ethics course, a required part of her curriculum before her residency interviews. She'd been drowning that semester. I remembered the night clearly, her sobbing into my sweatshirt on the couch, muttering, "I can't fail this. If I fail this, I don't get placed." I stayed up with her until 3 a.m., helping her build a structure for the argument, digging through legal precedents I barely understood. She fell asleep. I kept working. The draft was in my Google Docs, under my account. The tracked edits were time-stamped, metadata intact. My email attached to every revision. I gathered everything. The draft, the screenshots from Drew, Jovi's handwritten letter, financial records. I compiled it all into a clean PDF and sent it to the law review board with a short factual note. To whom it may concern, attached is documentation regarding possible academic misrepresentation by Dr. Vera Calderon. I have included the original file metadata for your review. Sincerely, Rilia Santiago. I CC'd Vera's firm, and then I closed the laptop and went outside. It was unusually still that afternoon, clouds low, windless. I sat on the porch steps and stared at the sidewalk, not thinking anything in particular, just waiting. 3 days later, the response came, formal, cold. Dear Ms. Santiago, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We have initiated an internal review process. Due to the nature of the materials provided, Dr. Calderon's academic record has been flagged for further investigation. We appreciate your discretion during this process. That same day, I received an anonymous email from someone inside the firm. The subject line read, "She's off the panel." The message was simple. Everything stopped today. No more interviews. HR closed her calendar. She hasn't been seen in the office since Monday. I didn't reply, but I did log back into LinkedIn. Her self-made post had been taken down. In its place was silence, no updates, no celebrations. And then I saw it. Under an old post about her being a first-generation success story, someone had commented, "Didn't she use someone else's work to get in?" It had no likes, no replies, just sat there. I didn't write it, but I didn't report it either. That evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but instinct won out. "Hello?" Her voice was unsteady. "Rilya, what's going on?" "With?" "Vera." People are asking questions. I got a call from someone at the church asking why she's not listed as a speaker anymore. I waited. "She said you were behind this." I didn't sigh. I didn't explain. "I told the truth," I said plainly. "That's what's going on." A pause, then more softly. "Why now?" "Because I finally stopped hoping she'd do it herself." We didn't speak much after that. The next morning, I took a walk through the park. It had rained overnight, so the path was slick and the trees looked like they'd been washed clean. There were no birds out, just the occasional dog walker and a jogger with headphones in. My phone buzzed again. It was Jovi. "They're pulling her from cases," the message read. "HR had a meeting. Nothing public yet, but she's not listed on any internal docs this week. It's happening." I stared at the screen. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. I felt still. That night, I sat on the patio with a blanket around my shoulders, a mug of tea in my hands. The stars were faint, clouds hanging just enough to blur them. But I looked up anyway. "She did this," I whispered. Not bitter, not gleeful, just stating the fact. She wrote this ending herself. It wasn't about ruining her. That had never been the point. It was about reclaiming a name she had buried to polish her own. But I still hadn't heard the last word, and it came from the person I least expected. I wasn't expecting to hear from Carter. It had been months since I'd seen him. Last time was that brief, polite nod across the hospital hallway before everything started unraveling. He'd always struck me as one of those men who smiled with his whole face but never gave anything away. So when his name lit up my screen late that Saturday morning, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity answered for me. "Hey, Rilya?" His voice was cautious, almost embarrassed. "Yes? I know this is out of the blue, but can we talk?" There was a pause between us, the kind that holds 1,000 unspoken sentences. Then I said, "You already called. You might as well start." He exhaled, slow and unsure. "I didn't know she was still married when we started seeing each other. She told me you two were estranged, that you'd been unstable for a while, that you were angry she made it out and you didn't." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "She told me you tried to ruin her, that you were obsessed with tearing her down," he continued. "But then I saw what you put on that stage." I didn't interrupt. I could tell this wasn't about seeking forgiveness. It was a confession. "I believed her for a while," he said. "I wanted to, because it made my life easier. But after the gala, after seeing that folder," his voice cracked a little. "She trashed my apartment that night," he said. "Burned a photo. The one you framed. The one of you two as kids at the fair. I remembered that photo. I had mailed it to her when she first got into residency. She'd never mentioned it again. She didn't even try to lie," he went on. "She just said, 'You're the next rung. like I was a step she had to stand on to get to the next level. My throat tightened. What do you want me to say, Carter? I already told HR. I gave them everything. Screenshots, emails. I'm done pretending. You didn't deserve any of that. For a long moment, I didn't speak. Then I laughed. Short, bitter, but real. The kind of laugh that doesn't ask permission. You didn't owe me anything, I said. But you gave me something back anyway. He was quiet. Good luck, I added, and hung up. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, letting the silence settle around me like dust. Then I walked over to the sink, turned on the faucet, and washed my hands. There was nothing on them, but somehow it felt like something had come off. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the community clinic. They were holding their annual gathering and wanted to honor women who had quietly shaped the lives of others. Jovi had submitted my name. I didn't answer right away. I reread the email 4 times before even considering it. Me, honored. For years I had been the background, the scaffolding, the girl behind the curtain. And now, someone wanted to put my name in lights. Not because I fought for it, but because I had held the weight when no one else did. The event was held in a modest community hall, nothing like the grand galas Vera had floated through. Folding chairs, homemade flyers, a fruit punch bowl with too much ginger ale and not enough fruit. I sat near the back, fingers folded in my lap, heart hammering louder than the microphone feedback. When they called my name, I walked slowly to the front. My heels echoed against the tile floor. My dress was simple. My words were quiet. Sometimes the world only sees the one on stage, I said, my voice steady. But someone built that stage. I was that someone. Silence. Then applause. Not polite, not forced, real. And I didn't need Vera's name to be on the banner to feel seen. I didn't need her to clap. I didn't need her at all. She felt it, though. Even if she didn't see it happen, I knew, because 2 days later, her name disappeared from the board of directors of a medical scholarship foundation. A quiet press release said she'd stepped down to focus on personal matters. Blakehart didn't fire her. Not officially, but she stopped being invited to the luncheons. Her speaking engagements dried up. Friends stopped tagging her in photos. She wasn't canceled, just receded. Once the applause stops, people notice who's still standing. A week passed, then 2. And then it came. A text. From her. Do you still have the pen you gave me? I stared at it for a long time. That pen had been a gift, years ago. I'd engraved her initials on it before her first interview. She carried it for years, or pretended to. My thumbs hovered over the screen. Then I typed, "No, I gave it to a real doctor." I didn't wait for a response. I locked my phone, placed it face down on the table, and went outside to water my plants. The sun was low, the soil dry. I moved slowly, pressing the nozzle just enough to dampen the dirt but not flood it. The mint leaves brushed against my arm, the lavender swayed gently in the breeze. That was the end of it, not with a bang, not with a dramatic speech, just a woman watering her garden with no more weight to carry. The storm was over, but not everything had healed. The message from Vera stayed unread in my inbox for a full day. I'd already seen the preview. 3 words. You win. I didn't click it. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. Nothing she could offer that I hadn't already reclaimed for myself. It wasn't about victory. It never was. The moment I stopped needing her acknowledgement was the moment I became whole. All that time, I thought I was waiting for her to apologize, to name me, to remember me. I was really waiting to remember myself. That afternoon, I was doing dishes when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail, not from Vera, from Marianne. Her voice was softer than I remembered, older, slower. "Hi, sweetheart, I made carrot cake. Thought you might want a slice. You were always the only one who appreciated the raisins. No pressure, just thought of you." I stood at the sink, water still running over my hands, and let that voicemail play twice. Then I turned off the faucet. It took me about an hour to decide. Not because I was unsure, Just cautious. Wounds that have just started to close shouldn't be poked for sport. But this wasn't about Vera. And Marianne had once been mine too. I drove across town, the windows down just enough to let the spring air in. By the time I pulled up to the familiar house, the front yard was full. Lawn chairs, cousins I hadn't seen in years, paper plates balanced on laps. Someone was manning the grill. Music floated out from the garage, something classic with a beat. I hesitated at the curb, then took a breath and stepped out of the car. Marianne saw me before anyone else. She lit up. "There she is," she said, arms wide. "Come on, baby, I saved you the corner piece." I walked through the gate slowly, unsure if I was still an outsider. But the moment I crossed the patio, someone called out my name, my full name. "Rilya, I thought that was you." It was Cousin Marcus. His wife waved. Their teenage daughter, Ava, looked at me curiously. "You're the one who helped Aunt Vera become a doctor, right?" I paused, smiled. "I was part of the story," I said. That was enough. Inside, the kitchen was just as I remembered. Fridge covered in magnets, a slightly crooked painting of sunflowers above the sink. Marianne sliced me a piece of carrot cake and slid it onto a chipped floral plate. "I never stopped making this," she said, handing me a fork. "You're the only one who didn't complain about the raisins." I smiled and took a bite. It tasted exactly like forgiveness. Later, while the house buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, Marianne pulled me aside. "I told her not to forget you," she said softly. "I told her not to confuse ambition with amnesia." I looked at her, and she reached into a drawer by the stove. Out came a small shoebox. She opened it slowly, revealing a collection of things I thought had been lost to time. Birthday cards, old snapshots, the sticky notes I used to leave on the fridge. "I never threw these away," she said. "Because you mattered, even when she acted like you didn't." My throat tightened. "You were never the shadow, sweetheart," she whispered. "You were the spine." She hugged me tight, and for a moment, I let myself lean in. That night, after the dishes were cleared and goodbyes were exchanged, I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. I parked by the lake near my apartment, took off my shoes, and walked barefoot along the path. The water was calm, barely rippling. Streetlights reflected off the surface like dim constellations. I let myself think of Vera, not with bitterness, not even sadness, just quiet detachment. You can love someone and still know they can't come back from what they did. I whispered goodbye, not to her, but to the version of myself that had waited too long for her to look back. When I got home, I noticed a new email. From her. Just 3 words. "You win." I didn't reply, because it wasn't about winning. It was about no longer being erased. A year later, I was invited to speak at a vocational high school for their senior career panel. Most of the students were first generation. Some were in foster care. Some were already working part-time jobs to help their families. The topic they gave me was Invisible Labor, Real Impact. I stood behind a plain wooden podium in a windowless cafeteria and looked out at faces full of possibility and exhaustion. I took a breath. "I'm not famous," I said. "You won't find my name on any walls. But you've seen the people I've helped. You've clapped for them. You've posted about them. I've been behind the curtain, holding the rope so someone else could rise." I paused, let it settle. You don't need to be on the cover of a magazine to matter. You just have to know you built something real. They clapped, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. Afterward, a girl with chipped blue nail polish and braids down her back lingered by the door. "That's the first time someone made me feel seen," she said. I smiled and placed my hand gently over my heart. "You are." And finally, I saw myself too. Sometimes the loudest victories are the quietest ones, the ones where no one claps, but you finally breathe. This wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was about reclaiming your voice when someone else tries to rewrite your worth. Have you ever been the one who held everything together, only to be left out of the picture? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more real, raw, human stories coming your way.